Assalamu alaikum everyone. Happy birthday. It's not my birthday, guys. It's not my birthday, guys. किसने बोल दिया आपको मेरी birthday है भाई? एक मिनट. वालेकुम अस्सलाम. वालेकुम अस्सलाम. अच्छा हम स्टार्ट तो कर रहे हैं but we'll take a break after 10 minutes for namaz, a quick 10-minute break for maghrib, and then we will continue. ठीक है? All right. Now. Oh bhai, it's not my birthday. चलें. I guess thank you. Okay. So let's begin. अच्छा अब हम simultaneous और surds को हम skip कर रहे हैं. ठीक है हम स्टार्ट करें क्वाड्रेटिक से. अच्छा अब मैं चैट बंद करूँगा. ठीक है आई कांट हैव यू गाइज जस्ट चिट चैटिंग व्हाइल आई एम टीचिंग. आई वोंट बी एबल टू कॉन्सेंट्रेट. ठीक है वॉल्यूम बढ़ा दें. वॉल्यूम बढ़ा देते हैं. चलें वॉल्यूम बढ़ा दिया मैंने. सही है. अच्छा प्लीज़ डोंट एक्सपेक्ट दैट आई विल बी टीचिंग ऑल द कॉन्सेप्ट्स फ्रॉम स्क्रैच. दैट इज़ नॉट पॉसिबल. सर्ट्स अच्छा चलो विल गो ओवर साइमल्टेनियस एंड सर्ट्स ऑल्सो अ लिटिल. ठीक है बट आई डू हैव टू क्लोज द चैट. ठीक है I do have to close the chat. I can see you guys are talking about leaks. You guys are talking about I don't know what not. It's all irrelevant. Okay. The notes. Okay, I'll talk about the notes. I have shared the notes with you guys. There is a link in description from where you can download the notes. Okay. Let me see if that link is working. Yeah, so it is working. From that link you can download all the notes. सही है. अच्छा अब मैं chat बंद कर रहा हूँ. मैं थोड़ी देर में खोलता रहूँगा. ठीक है just to see what you guys are up to. And yeah okay now actually before I start I would appreciate if you guys like the stream if you haven't done that yet, and also please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that either. ठीक है so लगता है सारी पढ़ाई लोगों को आखिरी दिन में ही करनी होती है. चलो मैं बाद में जवाब दूंगा. So let's begin. So this is a syllabus run through. Okay, a syllabus run through does not mean that if you haven't studied the entire year you can watch this stream and cover the entire syllabus. Okay, if that's the expectation that you have, then you're going to be disappointed. Okay, and you're going to be hugely disappointed. Okay, so that's not what we're going to do. This is not a stream so that we can cover all the concepts from scratch. This is just going to be a quick run through inshallah of all the topics. Okay, and I'll do that through the notes. Now simultaneous equation is kind of a prerequisite. Okay, it's something that you're expected to know because now you have simultaneous equations and you also have surds in O-level maths. Okay, O-level maths and IGCSE Math. So when do we feel the need to solve two equations simultaneously? When we want their point of intersection. Okay, now that point of intersection could be between a line and a curve. It could be between two straight lines. It depends on the nature of the question. Now the kind of situation that we may find ourselves in is when you have two linear equations. Okay, a linear and linear equation, or if you have a linear and non-linear equation. Now when we say linear, it means a straight line, y equals to mx plus c, which could be y equals to c or x equals to b. Okay, y equals to c, remember, is the equation of a horizontal line. X equals to b, remember, is the equation of a vertical line. And then you have y equals to mx plus c, which could be upward sloping or downward sloping. Now what are all the non-linear equations that we can come across? So we can come across quadratic, but we don't have cubic equations in our syllabus. We don't have exponential equations in our syllabus. Okay, we have quadratic and circle and trigonometric. Okay, now when it comes to two linear equations, the best method that you guys can use is elimination because it's neat, it's efficient, it does not take a lot of space. And you can also whatever you guys do, whatever method you guys use, if you're solving two equations simultaneously, irrespective of the method, make sure that you check your answer using your calculator. Okay, whatever it is that you can use your calculator to check your answer for, make sure that you do that, such as simultaneous equations, quadratic equations, quadratic inequalities, differentiation, gradient of a curve at gradient of tangent at any point, integration within limits. Okay, all these things you guys can check using your calculator, so make sure you do that. Okay, but you have to show all your working. Even if you're doing middle term breaking, you have to show that. If you're using the quadratic formula, no need to write down the quadratic formula, write down the formula with the values plugged in, then you can write down the final answer using your calculator, but you have to show your working. Just remember this one simple rule. Leave no evidence for the examiner that you've used a calculator to do this. Simple as that. Okay? Ab you guys are hopefully smart enough to figure out how that works. Now, substitution is not recommended when you have two linear equations. It's best that you use substitution only when you're in a situation where you have no other option. But the way that you substitute is that you make any one variable the subject, and whatever equation you've made it the subject from, you plug it in the other equation. So for example, here you can see I've made x the subject using the first equation, so I'm going to plug it in the I've used the second equation to make x the subject, so I'm going to plug it in the first equation. And the reason why I avoid this is because you have to deal with fractions. Sometimes you have to take the LCM, cross multiply and all that. However, if you're in a situation where you have one linear and one non-linear equation, like for example over here, this is the equation of a straight line, this is the equation of a curve, here your only option is to use substitution. So we'll make x the subject using the simpler of the two equations, so obviously we're going to use this. Now don't be a daredevil, I'm going to make x the subject using this. It's practically impossible. You can't do that. So don't even bother. And then substitute x into the other equation in place of x, obviously. And once you're done, if you have enough time in the exam, make sure that you check your answer. How will you check? By plugging in the values back into the equation and see if the left hand side is equal to the right hand side. Okay? Or you can check using your by simply using your calculator also. Okay. Now that's it as far as simultaneous equation is concerned. It's simply a prerequisite anyway. Surds may be, again, since this is now part of O levels in IGCSE, I'm not going to go over that. Okay. Yeah, majority of the times your calculator will do it for you. There's not much that you have to do. It used to be part of AS Math officially before 2025, but 2025 and onwards, it is since it's a part of math, you don't have to do surds separately. Let's begin with our first A-level topic, which is quadratic equations, और फिर इसके बाद हम एक नमाज break लेंगे, ठीक है? And then we will inshallah try to wrap it up before Isha, which is at 8:45, so that you guys can get a good night's sleep also. Now first, let's have a look at all the concepts that we have to cover. So there's completing square, with the help of which we learn how to make a rough sketch of a quadratic curve, very important, especially when it comes to functions, domain and range and all that kind of stuff. Then there is discriminant applied to a curve, then there is quadratic inequalities, then there are discriminant applied to a curve and a straight line, and then there is disguised quadratics. So these are the 5 concepts that we have in quadratics, which inshallah we're going to cover one by one. So let's begin with sketching a quadratic curve. Now what are all the ingredients that you need in order to sketch a quadratic curve? You need the nature. Okay, you need to know what kind of curve are you drawing. Are you drawing a minimum curve or are you drawing a maximum curve? Number 1. Then you need to know what is the turning point. Now, because at this point you all have done differentiation, so you can find out the turning point through differentiation also. But normally the question is structured in a way that we are first supposed to express it in completed square form before we do anything else. Okay, so once you do express it in completed square form, you would have the turning point anyway. And then you need to know the x-intercepts, if it has any, and then the y-intercept. Y-intercept will always be there. X-intercepts may or may not be there. Why? Because imagine you have a quadratic curve that's entirely above the x-axis, or imagine you have a quadratic curve that's entirely below the x-axis. In that case, you don't have any x-intercepts. Okay? Now, let's talk about nature. How do we determine the nature? The nature is determined by looking at the coefficient of x squared. If it's positive, then it's a minimum curve. If it's negative, then it's a maximum curve. Okay, so you can look at the general form, or you can also look at the completed square form to determine the nature. In both cases, you have to look for the coefficient of x squared. Then let's talk about the turning point. So for turning point, we bring it in completed square form. How? I'm not going to talk about that because this is something that you do in O levels, something that you do in A levels also. So okay, I'll just briefly go over it. So you separate the constant, you leave a bit of space, you look at first of all, you make sure that the coefficient of x squared is 1. If it's not, you take the coefficient of x squared common. Now, if the coefficient of x is 6, you add the square of 3. Whatever it is that you've added, you now have to make sure that you subtract that also. So this part of the expression becomes x plus 3, the whole thing squared, y plus, because the sign of the term with x is positive, and y3 squared, because that's what you've added. And then you do 8 minus 3 squared, which means 8 minus 9, which is minus 1. So now you have the coordinates of the turning point. Now I know some people like to use this, minus b upon 2a. You can do that also. You can do it through differentiation also. Or you can also do it through comparing of coefficients. And I've done it through both ways in mocks and in quadratic streams and multiple streams. I've done it multiple ways. Okay? Another example. Here, if the coefficient of x squared is not 1, you will take common to make sure that it is 1 before you begin. Okay? एक second. Just give me 1 minute. All right, now. Then let's talk about the other method, which is comparing of coefficients. Comparing of coefficients, what we do is we expand, okay? And once you've expanded, comparing of coefficients basically means that comparing of coefficients basically means after you've expanded, you look at the coefficient of x squared on the right hand side, you look at the coefficient of x squared on the left hand side, that gives you the value of a. You look at the coefficient of x on the right hand side, which is minus 2h, compare it with the coefficient of x on the left hand side, that's equal to 6. That way you have the value of h. And then for the constant is basically term or terms that have no variable with them, so that's ah squared plus k on the right, 8 on the left, so that will give you the value of k. Okay? Some more example questions that you guys can later review. Intercepts. Finding the intercepts is very easy. To find out the x-intercept, plug in y equals to 0 and solve. To find out the y-intercept, plug in x equals to 0 or solve. And you can simply eyeball the x-intercept by looking at the equation when it's expanded. And that is basically what the y-intercept is. Then if you have a quadratic equation like this and you want to find out the x-intercept, which is done by y equals to 0, sometimes you will be able to do it through factorization, sometimes through quadratic formula. Okay, if you can't factorize, then quadratic formula. Or if you already have it in completed square form, you can use completed square form to find out the x-intercepts. Okay? अब ये curve है, इसके हम turning point भी निकाल चुके हैं. We have the y-intercept also. We have the x-intercepts also. Now we can make a rough sketch. Okay, and this is basically what we get. So on the other hand, if you have a curve like this, if you try to make a rough sketch of it and you try to find out the x-intercepts, you will notice that it's not possible, which means this curve is entirely above the x-axis. That is why it's not possible to find out the x-intercepts. Okay? Now, some example questions. ये भी देख लेते हैं. Express 2x squared plus 8x minus 10 in the form a, x plus b, the whole thing squared plus c. So you can see I've turned it into completed square form by first taking 2 common, making sure the coefficient of x squared is 1. For the curve 2x squared minus 8x minus 10, state the least value of y and the corresponding value of x. Least value of y basically means the turning point, the y coordinate of the turning point. So once you have turned it into completed square form, you can see that the x coordinate of the turning point is minus 2, y coordinate of the turning point is minus 18. So the y value is the least value and minus 2 is the corresponding value of x. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा, अब एक काम करते हैं. Let's take a break. Let's take a namaz break. maghrib की अजान हो रही है. So I think 10 minutes should be enough. 10 minutes के बाद हम इसको continue करते हैं. ठीक है? And let's try to wrap it up inshallah in the next 2 hours. Okay, so yeah, we'll resume after namaz inshallah. Okay, welcome back. Now let's continue. So we have to start quadratic inequality. Okay. So let's have a look at quadratic inequality. Quadratic inequality mein kya hai? Quadratic inequality is very similar to a quadratic equation, except that we're not solving for x-intercepts. We're solving for the range of x where the curve is either above the x-axis or it's below the x-axis. That's the difference between solving a quadratic equation and a quadratic inequality. So let's suppose this is the quadratic inequality. It's x squared minus 8x plus 12 greater than 0. This means the range of x where the curve is above the x-axis, okay? So you solve it like you solve any other quadratic equation, you obtain the x-intercepts. Now you make a rough sketch. अब देखो ये एक lazy or stupid mistake है, ठीक है? This is ego solving. Ego solving is that I don't need to go the extra mile, I can just do it directly, ठीक है? And it doesn't even make sense. It's a mixture of ego solving and doom solving. Why does it not make sense? Why? Because a lot of times at this point, what students do is, just like how, if you were solving a quadratic equation, you would equate both the expressions to equal to 0 to find out the value of x. Here students equate both the expressions to greater than 0 and find out the range of x. Okay? Why does that not make any sense? Because you're saying x is greater than 2 and you're saying x is greater than 6. So if x is greater than 6 bol hi rahe ho, so why you're saying greater than 2? Okay, that's like me saying that in order to get an A, you need to score more than 80%. And then some student asking, what about more than 60%? Do I need to score more than 60% also? Obviously, if it's more than 80%, it's more than 60%. So this is a lazy and a stupid mistake that students who doom solve and ego solve make. Why? Because they don't want to go the extra mile. Go the extra mile, make a rough sketch, and you will often find this in the examiner report multiple times. Ke bhai khuda ke waste, when you're solving a quadratic inequality, for the love of God, make a rough sketch and then write down the answer. So you make a rough sketch of a quadratic curve with x-intercepts 2 and 6, and then you think, okay, which part of the curve do we want? Do we want the curve which is above the x-axis or below the x-axis? Since it's greater than 0, that means above. Now, what's the range of x where the curve is above the x-axis? It's on the left-hand side of 2. That means x is less than 2. It's on the right-hand side of 6. That means x is greater than 6. That's it. Another example where it's greater than 0, you find out the x-intercepts, you make a rough sketch. This means that x is less than minus 3 and x is greater than 3. Now, what if it's less than 0? Once again, you solve, but this time you want this part of the curve. So what's the range of x for which the curve is below the x-axis? It is greater than minus 4 and it's less than 5. Now, whenever your solution is in between two values, you will write your final answer like this. Whenever your solution is outside of two values, isko hum bolte hain outer range. Whenever it's an outer range, this is the only way to give your answer. Please don't give your answer like this. This is wrong. Okay? Do not give your answer like this. Okay, x is less than, nahin. Okay, x is greater than 2. And you're saying okay, x is greater than minus 3 and lesser than minus 3. Oh, sorry, the other way around. Just make sure you don't write it in a straight line. Okay, it's greater than 2 and you say this. Okay, this is wrong. Okay, you only do this. You only write your answer in a straight line when you have an inner range. Inner range means when the solution lies between two values. Okay, more examples of quadratic inequalities. Acha, also remember that whenever you have to multiply or you have to multiply both sides of the inequality by minus 1 to make sure that the coefficient of x squared is positive, the inequality sign flips. Okay, whenever both sides of the inequality are multiplied by minus 1, the inequality sign flips. This is not a rule which is exclusive to AS. This is something that we did in O levels also. So if you're asked to solve a quadratic inequality which has the coefficient of x squared is negative, don't do that. First multiply it by minus, make it positive, and as a result of multiplying by minus, make sure you change the inequality sign and then you carry on. So now it becomes less than 0. We solve for x-intercepts, that's 1 and 5. Now you want the range of x for which the curve is below the x-axis. And what is that? That is between 1 and 5. So your answer will be x is greater than 1, less than 5. Okay? Now this is the kind of stuff that you can use your calculator to check your answer. Emphasis on the word check. Don't use your calculator to write down the final answer. Use your calculator only to check your answer. ठीक हो गया? These are some past paper questions that you have, and this is a summary. By the way, I've shared all the notes in the link in description. You guys can open that folder, and in that folder, you have all my notes. Okay, now, let's talk about roots of a quadratic curve. Now, what are roots? Roots is basically another word for x-intercepts, okay? Now, nature of roots. How do we describe how many times the curve is cutting the x-axis? That's nature of roots. So if you have a curve which is cutting the x-axis at 2 points, what do we say? We say that the nature of roots are real and distinct. Why? Because the curve cuts at 2 points. If you have a quadratic curve which only touches the x-axis, we say that the nature of roots are real and equal, okay? Or we say that it's tangent to the x-axis. Okay? Achha. Then, if a quadratic curve lies entirely above or entirely below, it's possible that it's below. If it's a maximum curve, we say no real roots or imaginary roots. Okay, not being real is the same thing as imaginary. Okay, then there is this thing known as discriminant, which is basically a tool that helps us distinguish between the nature of roots. Okay, and what is discriminant? Discriminant is just this part of the quadratic formula. If the discriminant is greater than 0, the nature of roots are real and distinct. You get two values of x, meaning when you solve, you get two solutions, and the curve cuts the x-axis at 2 points. Obviously, if you get two values of x, the curve will cut the x-axis at 2 points. It's just an elaborate way of describing it. Okay? If the discriminant is equal to 0, that means the nature of roots are real and equal. You can see that they're both real numbers. We are able to solve for their values, and they're equal. That's why we call them real and equal. Why do we call them real and distinct? Because they're real numbers and they're different. That's why we call them real and distinct. Why do we call them real and equal? Because they're real and they're equal. And the curve is tangent to the x-axis, or it says repeating roots. And how do you sketch it? You sketch it in a way that the curve is tangent to the x-axis. Achha. Then you have b square minus 4ac less than 0, in which case there are no real roots, imaginary roots, or we say that the curve lies above the x-axis if it's a minimum curve. Achha. This is the part where we say that this curve is always positive. Why? Because all the y values will always be positive no matter what is the value of x. Even if you extend it in this direction or in this direction, all the y values will always be positive. Or if you have a maximum curve with no x-intercepts, that means it will always be negative, or you can say that it's always below the x-axis. Okay? So ये summary आ गई. अच्छा, sometimes the question just says real roots. Doesn't specify whether it's real and equal or real and distinct. That means we're going to merge these two cases and we're going to consider that to be greater than or equal to 0. अच्छा. Show that the whole curve lies above the x-axis. That means we will show that the discriminant is less than 0, which means no real roots of a minimum curve. Therefore, the curve is above the x-axis. Okay? Or you can also do that by finding out the turning point. If the curve is minimum and the y-coordinate of the turning point is positive, that means the curve reaches its minimum y value before it even reaches the x-axis. Okay, if 1.75 is the y value, then how is it ever going to have any x-intercept? Okay, so that is another way of describing, of basically showing why this curve is always above the x-axis. Achha, then some example questions. Now let's talk about discriminant applied to a curve and a straight line. Now, just like how a curve can interact multiple ways with the x-axis, a line and a curve can also interact multiple ways. It's possible that a line cuts the x-axis at the line cuts the curve at 2 points, in which case the discriminant will be greater than 0. How will that be described? The line and the curve intersect at 2 points, or it may be mentioned that there are two solutions. It's possible that a line is tangent to the curve, or even a circle for that matter. In that case, we say line is tangent to the curve, or we say one solution and the discriminant is equal to 0. It's possible that you have a line and a curve that do not intersect at all, in which case the discriminant will be less than 0. It may be mentioned that line and curve do not meet, or it may be mentioned that there is no solution. Okay? Achha, if the question does not specify as to how many points do they meet at, and it just says meets the curve, that means b square minus 4ac will be greater than or equal to 0. Achha, how do you solve these questions where we're talking about line and a curve? First of all, you solve them simultaneously. You equate them or you substitute them. Okay, so it's saying that determine the set of values, which means you're going to get a range of values of the constant k for which the line y equals to 4x plus k does not intersect the curve y equals to x square. ठीक है, अब हम क्या करेंगे? सबसे पहले हमने दोनों को equate किया. We make a nice quadratic equation out of it. We bring it in this form. Then we read the question. Okay, we read the question and we see what nature are we looking, what is the nature are we looking at? We're looking at the line and the curve do not intersect. That means we're going to take our discriminant and set it less than 0. So discriminant को हमने less than 0 किया, and using this inequality we will find out the range of k, which means for as long as k is less than minus 4, here the line will not intersect the curve. Okay, let's do another example. Okay, now Find the set of values of k. Once again, set of values means you're likely to get a range of answers for which the line y equals to kx minus 4 intersects the curve at two distinct points. Two distinct points matlab b square minus 4ac is greater than 0. So you solve them simultaneously as if you're trying to find out the point of intersection, but you'll realize that you can't actually solve them simultaneously. Why? Because you don't know what the value of k is. But you're not supposed to find out the point of intersection. You're supposed to find out the range of k for which there are 2 points of intersection. There is a difference between the two. Acha, अब notice that there are x in two places. So what we do is we take minus x common so that we have 2 plus k, and this is the coefficient of x now. So a is the coefficient of x squared, which is 1. B is the coefficient of x, which is minus bracket open 2 plus k. C is the constant. We will do b square minus 4ac is greater than 0. Now a lot of times you will notice that nobody considers this minus sign. Nobody really gives this minus sign any importance, and the reason behind that is when the minus is with b, once you square it, it becomes positive. Okay, so you expand this using identities and you end up with a quadratic equation. Now at this point you may be thinking कि हम completing square use कर लें. You can use completing square also, but majority of the times you will end up with a quadratic inequality, and this is where the knowledge of quadratic inequalities will come in handy. So you will solve for the x-intercepts. Okay, you've ended up with a quadratic inequality. Solve it like you would solve any other quadratic equation. Now draw a quadratic curve with these two x-intercepts, 6, minus 6 and 2. Now what part of the curve do you want? You want the part of the curve which is above the x-axis. Now this time you're not solving for x, you're actually solving for k. So you will say the part of the curve which is above the x-axis is on the left hand side of minus 6, so k is less than minus 6, and on the right hand side of 2, which means k is greater than 2. ठीक हो गया? Find the value of the constant c for which the line is tangent. So once again, you substitute the equation of the line into the equation of the curve. ठीक है, ये मैंने इसकी marks distribution बताई हुई है. So ये line और curve को equal कर दिया, सही है. Y square equals to 4x, so whatever is the expression for y, you have to square that. You get all the terms on the left hand side. Here's the coefficient of x, here's the coefficient of x square, which is a, and the constant is c square. So b square minus 4ac is equals to 0. Notice the question says find the value of the constant. Does not say values, does not say set, which means we are anticipating only one solution, and that's exactly what we end up with. ठीक हो गया? Some more example questions that you guys can later on review. अच्छा, कुछ ऐसे सवाल होते हैं. First let's go over disguised quadratics, then we'll go over some questions where it says कि show that they always intersect, show that they never intersect, those kind of questions. अच्छा, disguised quadratic is something, is an equation which kind of looks like a quadratic equation, but it isn't, but can be turned into a quadratic equation. So what we do here is so what's the format? The format is that you will have 3 terms. Number 1, not necessarily 3 terms, you can also have 2 terms. But the powers on the unknowns or on the variables will be such that one power is always double of the other, because that's how a quadratic equation is, right? X square and x. So here you can see you have x power 4 and x square. So if I take the smaller power and I substitute it as a, then x power 4 becomes a square. Now it becomes a regular quadratic equation which we can solve using the regular method. And then we can recall that a is not what we're solving for, we're actually solving for x square. So we recall that x square was equal to a, so x square is equals to 9, x square is equals to 1 upon 4, and then we solve for x and we get 4 solutions. Okay, here's another example. Achha, if you are solving it like this, here we will take root x to be equal to a, and if you take root x to be equal to a, x becomes a square. This is the quadratic equation that you end up with. You solve it like you would solve any other quadratic equation. But please note, it's not possible that the solution to any square root, it's not possible that root x is equals to a negative value. Why? Because whenever you take the square root, okay, you might think, isn't it plus minus? Well, plus minus is when you put the square root on both sides yourself. Okay, so if let's say the story starts from here, x square equals to 9. And since you have put the square root sign yourself on both sides, you will get plus minus. But if you're asked to evaluate square root of 9, the answer is positive 3 only. So that is why it's not possible that a square root of a positive square root of any number gives a negative result. Okay, if there's no sign, there's only plus. Okay, but this is possible, so 36 is the only solution. अच्छा, अब कुछ इस तरह के सवाल होते हैं quadratics में especially, where you have to show that the line and the curve always intersect, or you have to show that the line and the curve do not meet. Just for example, I think we were discussing this in the last stream also. A line has equation y equals to 3x minus 2k and a curve has equation so and so. Show that the line and the curve meet for all values of x. Achha, what's the condition for the line and the curve to meet for all values of x? The discriminant must always be greater than or equal to 0. So we will solve it like we solve any other equation regarding discriminant. We will get a, b and c to plug in the discriminant formula b square minus 4ac, and then this is what we end up with. Now, how do I show that this is always greater than or equal to 0? By either bringing it in completed square form or by further factorizing it, and since we're able to factorize it, we get k minus 1 the whole thing square. Up anything with a square on it can least be equal to 0 and every other value will be greater than 0. So we say at this point that k minus 1 the whole thing square is greater than or equal to 0 for all values of k. Therefore, the line and the curve will meet for all values of k. ठीक है, इसी तरह का एक और भी सवाल है which I hope I can find. Here it is. Yeah. Show that the curve with equation so and so and the line with equation so and so meet for all values of the constant k. So we will equate the two equations, we'll apply the discriminant and see what the discriminant turns out to be. It turns out to be 9k square plus 600. Again, this you do not have to convert into completed square form because you know कि 9k square कुछ भी हो जाए कम से कम ये 0 होगा, negative तो कोई सवाल ही नहीं पैदा होता, and the entire expression no matter what happens will always be greater than 1600 because the least you can turn this expression is by turning this into 0, and there's always a plus 1600, so that means it's always going to be greater than or equal to 0. You have to use your common sense. There's not a formula that I can give you which is going to solve your problems. It's nothing but common sense. So this expression will always be greater than or equal to 1600 for all values of k. Therefore, the line and the curve intersect for all values of k. I don't think I can find any more questions, but I hope you guys get the point. Okay, whenever you have a question like this, chalo ek aur sawal aa gaya. Chalo, that's nice. Show that for all values of m, the line intersects the curve at two distinct points. So you apply the discriminant by first equating the two equations. You get b square, you equate the two equations, you apply the discriminant, and after you apply the discriminant, this is what you end up with. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब इसको देख के नहीं बता सकते हम कि हमेशा पॉजिटिव होगा या हमेशा नेगेटिव होगा. That is why we always have to bring it in completed square form. So as soon as I bring it in completed square form, this is what we end up with. Now m minus 4, the whole thing square, if I think of it as a quadratic curve, it's a quadratic curve which has turning point at 4, 1. Okay, it's a quadratic curve which has a turning point at 4, 1, which means the end result of this is always going to be positive. Because of the square, the least that it can ever be equal to is 0, and because of the plus 1, the least expression that this entire thing can ever be equal to is 1. So that means this is always greater than or equal to 1 for all values of m. Doesn't matter मैं m को कुछ भी कर दूँ, ये plus 1 की वजह से ये हमेशा 1 होगा या 1 से greater होगा. So that is why the line always intersects the curve. ठीक है, तो ये हमारा run through हो गया quadratics का. And at this pace, I think 10 बजे तक तो हो ही जाएगा इंशाल्लाह. Now let's talk about binomial. अच्छा, मैं थोड़ी देर के लिए ज़रा प्रेशर कुकर खोल देता हूँ. By that I mean the live chat. See what you guys are up to, and then I will turn it off again. Volume of rotation बेटा end में करूँगा. ठीक है, I'm not going to do volume of rotation immediately. Okay, I'm just going to go in this order. Okay, so if you want to take a break, do something else, you can come back. But this is the order in which I'm going to go. I'm going to do quadratics, then binomial, then APGP, coordinate geometry, straight line, circle, circular measure, trigonometry, functions, differentiation, integration. So this is the order in which I'm going to go. If you have a problem with it, then watch it later. Simple as that. Wa alaikum assalam. Surds is not something that's officially part of AS anymore. It's become assumed knowledge. Just you know, sine rule, cosine rule is not something that's part of AS. It's considered assumed knowledge. मतलब you should know. सर सुबह क्या करना चाहिए वो बता दें. सुबह आपने सिर्फ अपने notes go through करने हैं. That's it. Just go through your notes. Do not solve anything. ठीक है? And please don't take this advice lightly. Some people learn this lesson the hard way. So you don't want that. दुआ तो बिल्कुल करनी चाहिए. अच्छा, okay, I can't keep up. Sir, can we Yeah, you can do completing square and factorizing. Would further differentiation have more chance? But I don't know. Further differentiation या है किसका कितना chance है ये मैं नहीं बता सकता. I can teach you the concept. That's all I can do. So कितने बजे उठना चाहिए? The sooner the better, so that you have enough time to get ready. You have enough time to settle. So yeah. अच्छा repeat मैं कुछ नहीं कर रहा आज. ठीक है. आज अगर आपने repeat करना है तो आप stream का वाला हिस्सा जितनी दफ़ा दिल चाह रहे हैं आप देख लें. 10 दफ़ा 20 दफ़ा it's up to you. ठीक है. Second we said discriminant is x-axis for the concept. Discriminant is x-axis for the concept? I don't know what you mean by that. If we haven't done yearlies, is it still okay to do them? But I hope you're joking. अच्छा चलें, I'm gonna put the chat on mute again. ठीक है, अभी थोड़ी देर में मिलते हैं. Now, binomial theorem. Binomial theorem is what we use when we have to expand two terms that are either being added or subtracted with a significantly large power such that we can't do it otherwise. Like for example, 1 plus x, the whole thing squared, you don't need binomial theorem for that. If it's cube, you still don't need binomial theorem. If it's power 4, you still don't need binomial theorem. But this is when things start to get out of hands. Okay, this is where you need binomial theorem. Okay, अच्छा binomial theorem का एक rule याद रखो that the number of terms will always be 1 greater than the power. For example, if the power is 2, the number of terms will be 3. If the power is 3, the number of terms will be 4. If the power is 4, when you expand this and simplify, you will get 5 terms. Okay, now. What's the formula that we use? This is the formula that we use. NCR equals to A raised to the power n minus r, b power r. Make sure to read the question carefully. Sometimes the question will ask you to find out some specific term. Sometimes the question will ask you to find out all the terms. Okay, so you don't want to waste your time finding all the terms when the question only requires a few specific terms. So if let's suppose you're supposed to do 1 plus x, the whole thing power 5. So I prefer to do it vertically. If you haven't done it vertically, if you've done it horizontally, now is not the time to experiment or change something that you've been doing a certain way for a long time. So let's start with r equals to 0. That means 5c0, 1 raised to the power 5 x power 0, then r equals to 1, so on and so forth. Just remember that if the sign in between is plus, all the terms will be positive and the power should increase one by one. Starting with x power 0, then x squared, x cubed, x power 4, x power 5. And here you can see we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 terms. Total number of terms n plus 1. Achha, here, if the question says expand up to the term in x power 4, that means stop as soon as you get r power 4 because r power 4 will give you x power 4 and that's it. अच्छा, अब इसके कुछ concepts देख लेते हैं. इसके कुछ concepts होते हैं when you have to find out the coefficient of x power n when x is in the second term, first term, or in both the terms. In all these cases, you can just use your common sense and get the job done. Okay, but let's identify some pattern also. Notice that when x is in the second term, the value of r is equal to the power on x, meaning if I take r as 3, I get x cubed. If I take r as 4, I get x power 4. If I take r as 1, I get x power 1. If I take r as 5, I get x power 5. So the rule is that if let's suppose x is in the second term, don't worry about what happens if it's not in the second term, but if x is in the second term and you want the coefficient of x power 10, all you have to do is take r as 10. Okay, take r as 10, okay, or what you can do is, again, use your common sense, expand without knowing the value of r, and see what should be the value of r here so that I end up with x power 10. And the answer to that is 10. And when you expand it using 10, make sure that your answer indeed gives you x power 10. If you want x power 2, if you want the coefficient of x squared, take r as 2, and in the end you can see that you do get the coefficient of x squared. Now since you're only asked to write down the coefficient, make sure that you just write down the coefficient only. Some example questions that you guys can go over. Okay, achha, let's see what happens when x is in the first term. Rarely tested, but something that you need to know. Now when x is in the first term, r is equals to n minus the power on x, meaning if you want x cubed and n is equals to 7, the value of r that you're going to take is 7 minus 3. Again, logic dekh lo, you don't have to memorize these rules if you just understand the logic. So let's expand without knowing the value of r, keeping in mind that we want the coefficient of x cubed. Ab dekho, whatever is the value of r over here, okay, whatever I place over here, it does not have an impact on the power on x. But this the value of 7 minus r will decide what is the power on x. Now, since I want the coefficient of x cube, I will take 7 minus r and equate it to 3, and that is how I get r to be equal to n minus the required power of x. So r is equals to 4. That means if I do expand with r equals to 4, I will end up with the coefficient of x cube. That's the rule. Okay? Some more examples. Acha, when x is in both terms. So when x is in both terms, some people do trial and error. Some people do it this way. So when x is in both terms, what you do is you ignore all the terms that have no role to play, or all the terms that have no x in them. So I'm going to ignore 5cr, I'm going to ignore minus 3. And since I want the coefficient of x power 1, that means without knowing the value of r, I will first equate it to x power 1. ठीक है, r को as it is रख के मैंने उसको equal to x power 1 कर दिया. अच्छा, अब since I'm ignoring this, I'm only going to be focusing on x. So x power 5 minus r, let's shift this in the numerator. This becomes x power minus 1 to the power r. So the powers get multiplied. And what do we want the end result to be equal to? We want the end result to be equal to x power 1. So at this point, it is no longer a binomial question. At this point, it has now become an indices question. So same bases are being multiplied. That means the powers get added. We equate that to x power 1. That gives us the value of r as 2, which we're now going to plug in our expansion and see whether that gives us the coefficient of x or not. Make sure you're not doom solving. ऐसा ना हो कि आपने r की value निकाली हो to find out the coefficient of x, but when you use that value of r, you end up with the coefficient of x cube, and you don't even realize that you've done something wrong, and you think that the answer is okay. Okay, that's a classic example of doom solving. So we do end up with x only, so that means this is the correct answer. Achha, whenever the question says independent of x, that means x power 0. So let's expand by keeping r as it is. Okay, so I'm going to ignore 6cr because it has no role to play. It has no x with it. I'm going to ignore this 1 and 2. And I'm going to equate this to x power 0 because independent of x means constant. That means x power 0. So the powers get multiplied. Once again, it's become an indices question now. So x power 12 minus r into x power minus 1 into r. So x power minus r equals to x power 0, which means we now solve this for the value of r, and then we use this to find out the term that's independent of x. Notice that when I do use this, I do end up with the term that's independent of x because x gets cancelled out, which means that I've done it correctly. Okay? So another example for you guys to have a look at. Achha, then there are some exceptional cases for which what do you use? You use nothing but your common sense. So for example, if this is what you have and you want to find out the coefficient of x power 6, तो आप क्या करोगे? You will first expand without knowing the value of r. Okay, you will use the NCR formula. Now think to yourself, okay, what should be the value of r so that I get x power 6? Okay, eyes on the prize. This is the prize. This is where you're at. So what should be the value of r? What should be taken as the value of r? It's 3. So that 3 times 2 becomes 6. And when you do that, you do end up with x power 6. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब एक इसका कॉन्सेप्ट होता है जिसमें आपको अच्छा ये भी देख लो. Although rarely tested, but it's important. ठीक है? Make sure that you know how to expand NCR without a calculator. I hope this is not coming as a surprise to you guys. It's something that I teach every year. It's rarely tested, but you never know. It's still part of the syllabus. So NCR without a calculator कैसे expand करते हैं मैं बता देता हूँ. For example, if you have 7c2, that means the numerator will contain 2 terms because of this 2, and the terms will be such that you start from 7 and every term will be 1 less than the term that you start with. So 7c2 will be 7 into 6 divided by 2 factorial. ठीक है? ये मैंने मेरी जो binomial की पूरी playlist है उसमें मैंने ये समझाया हुआ है. Then 10c3, that means in the numerator will have 3 terms starting from 10. Every following term will be 1 less and the denominator will be 3 factorial. Okay, and this is how you apply it to n. NC2 means n into n minus 1 divided by 2 factorial. NC1 is equals to n. NC0 is equals to 1. Then NC3 equals to n into n minus 1 into n minus 2 divided by 3 factorial, so on and so forth. Now हो सकता है आप लोग सोच रहे हो कि भाई ये क्या, ये तो हम पहली दफ़ा देख रहे हैं, तो हमारे टीचर ने कराया नहीं. It's rarely tested. In fact, it's been over 10 years I think since this was tested. That's why, maybe. But it's still part of the syllabus. ठीक है? So the coefficient of x squared in the expansion where n is a positive integer is 3 upon 5. Now, since x is in the second term, what is the value of r that's going to give you the coefficient of x squared? That is 2. That means NC2, 1 raised to the power n minus 2, x upon 5, the whole thing raised to the power 2. Now, the only new concept over here is how you expand nc2. So that's going to be n into n minus 1 upon 2 factorial into x square upon 25 is what you get after you expand this. Now, this is the coefficient of x square, equated to 3 upon 5, solve for the value of n. Obviously, n is something that can only be positive. The question says here also, and that's it. ठीक है. अच्छा, अब इसमें एक और concept है जो कि ज़रा थोड़ा rarely tested है. Pascal's triangle is not part of your syllabus, by the way. ठीक है, ये सिर्फ मैंने अपनी क्लास में, we just did it for fun. It's not part of the syllabus in case you're wondering. अच्छा, binomial theorem में एक concept है, हाँ ये वाला, ठीक है. That is when you use your expansion to find an approximate value of a certain term raised to a certain power. अब ये हमेशा से एक standard rule follow करेगा. So notice that here we've just expanded for the first 3 terms of this. Here we are. Now the question says use your answer to part A with a suitable value of x to find an approximation to 1.985, the whole thing power 5. अब गौर से देखो, you have power 5 here, you have power 5 here. Is this a coincidence? No. Okay, this is, you're supposed to use the answer to the first part, and notice that in the first part you expanded something raised to the power 5. Now you're supposed to evaluate something raised to the power 5. So the first thing you're going to do is, I'll just do this again, is that you're going to equate the expansion that you just expanded, which is 2 minus 3 upon 2x, the whole thing raised to the power 5, equals to 1.985, the whole thing power 5. Now notice that they're both equal to power 5, which means I can ignore their powers and I can simply compare 2 minus 3 upon 2x with 1.985. And what's the purpose behind comparing this? The purpose is so that I can find out the suitable value of x, which the question mentions. This is the suitable value of x. Now, what am I going to do with the suitable value? I'm going to use the answer to part A. That means in this expansion, I'm going to plug in the suitable value, and this is what we end up with. Okay? So it's a very easy concept, and the good news is it has a standard way. There's a standard way of solving such questions. Let me see if I can pull out another question where this is tested. No, it isn't. Khair, irrespective, the way that it's done remains the same. ठीक हो गया? Okay, so that takes care of binomial also. Now let's have a look at APGP. Now APGP is all about formulas. Formulas, and when it comes to word problems, you have to go the extra mile. Okay, what do I mean by that? I'll explain. Achha, first of all, what's AP? AP is when the common difference is the same. Okay, so if you know that there are 3 terms that are consecutive and in an arithmetic progression, you can do T3 minus T2 equals to T2 minus T1. This is sometimes what you have to do to find out the common difference, or maybe to make an equation which you can then use to find out, maybe with you can then use with another equation and then solve it simultaneously. But if it's a geometric progression, that means the ratio is common between any 2 consecutive terms. Okay, arithmetic progression के formulas देख लेते हैं. To find out the general term, this is the formula. Now, although formulas are given, and if you're ever feeling any doubt, make sure that you refer to the formula sheet instead of doing it wrong. Achha. Then there is a formula for sum. There are 2 formulas for sum, and there's also a formula to find out the number of terms. So just 1 minute, guys. Okay, now, so here's a formula to find out the number of terms. ठीक है, वैसे इतना relevant नहीं है ये formula. Just stick to this. And then there is a formula for sum. Now know that, I'm sure you guys know that there are 2 formulas for sum. One is when the first term is given, and the other is that you use when the last term is also given. So depending on the situation, you use the formula and you get the answer. अच्छा फिर let's talk about GP. अच्छा ये देख लो. This is something that a lot of students get wrong. The sum of the first 9 terms of an arithmetic progression is 117 and the sum of the next 4 terms. So when this question came, a lot of students messed it up. Okay, there is no formula to calculate the sum of the next 4 terms. Okay, so you will do the sum of the first 9 terms equals to 117, that is correct. But when it says the sum of the next 4 terms, because there is no formula for the sum of the next 4 terms, what you have to do is you have to combine them. Next 4 terms ka matlab kya hai? After the 9 terms. That means the sum of the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th. The sum of the 10th till the 13th term is 91. But there's no formula for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine them. Okay, we're going to combine 117 and 91. That way we have the sum of the first 9 and the next 4, which means the sum of the first 13 terms. And that's how we're going to form 2 equations. One equation with the help of this and the other equation with the help of this. So equation number 2, equation number 1. Okay, so make sure to read the question carefully, whether it's talking about sum of the first or sum of the next. Achha, then you have GP. Again, GP may remember it's the common ratio, and there are 2 formulas for sum. A lot of people get confused. Which formula do they have to use? Doesn't matter which one you use. If the common ratio is positive and you end up using the formula which we're supposed to use when it's negative, the 2 minus will cancel out and you will get the correct answer anyway. Okay? So no need to get confused. Achha, then there is sum to infinity, which remember only exists if the common ratio is between -1 and 1. Okay, so here's sum to infinity, which only exists if the common ratio is between -1 and 1. Some examples for you guys to look at. I'll jump straight to word problems now. I've explained sum to infinity, not a good idea to go in detail right now. Achha, अब word problems. अब देखो word problems में the simple solution is to go the extra mile. Okay, first of all, if the word problem tells you exactly what progression it is that we're following, then great. But if it doesn't, then there are ways to figure it out. Okay, we'll talk about that. A debt of 3,276 is repaid by weekly payments, which are in arithmetic progression. The first payment is 60 and the debt is fully repaid after 48 weeks. That means when you add all the payments made in 48 weeks, when you add all the 48 payments, we achieve what? We achieve the total debt. Okay, ये debt है ना, which you're going to repay fully after 48 weeks. So that means all your 48 weekly payments add up to this. So you have to read the question carefully to pick equations. So the first payment is 60, and after 48 weekly payments, you are basically able to pay off the debt. So that means the sum of the first 48 terms is equals to this, and that way you can find out the common difference. And after finding out the common difference, you can find out the third payment. Acha dekho, whenever it is that you're asked to find out, let's suppose the sum of the first 3 terms of an arithmetic progression or the sum of the first 4 terms or 5 terms, usme there is no point in using the formula. ठीक है, ये चीज़ ज़रा सब देख लें. If let's say it's an arithmetic progression and you're asked to find out the sum of the first 3 terms. I see people using the formula wasting a lot of time. Why? Because agar sum of first 3 terms, you know that the first term is a, next is a plus d, next is a plus 2d, and next is going to be a plus 3d. So don't waste time and use the formula, just do it manually. Sum of the first 4 terms will simply be equal to 4a plus 3d, 3d plus 3d, that's equal to 6d. Okay. Similarly, in a geometric progression, if the question is saying sum of the first 3 terms, you know that the first term will be a, next term will be obtained by multiplying with the common ratio, then the next term will also be obtained by multiplying with the common ratio, and then the next term will also be obtained by multiplying with the common ratio. So if let's suppose you want the sum of the first 4 terms, let's say I haven't seen any question which says sum of first 4 terms, I've seen sum of 3, but if let's say that's the case, then you just do it manually. If you use the formula, you're not going to be able to solve it further. If let's say it says sum of the first 3 terms, that means a plus ar plus ar square. That's good enough. No need to use the formula. Same goes for GP. If it says sum of the first 3 terms, that means 3a plus 3d. Yeah. ठीक हो गया? Okay. Now coming back to the word problem. find the sum to infinity of the geometric progression whose first term is 6 and whose second term is 4. Okay, so this you guys can find out. Sum to infinity, it's not relevant to word problem, but anyway, here we are. Okay. A small trading company made a profit of 25,000 in the year 2000, 250,000, sorry, in the year 2000. The company considered two different plans, Plan A and Plan B, for increasing its profits. Under Plan A, the annual profit would increase each year by 5% of its value in the preceding year. Okay. And then there is Plan B. अभी इसको बाद में पढ़ते हैं, पहले ये देख लो. Plan A में you increase it by 5% of its value in the preceding year, and then Plan B में you would increase each year by a constant amount. So whenever you are increasing it by a fixed percentage of the preceding year, it's a geometric progression. And how do you find out the common ratio? It's 100 plus p upon 100 if you increase it, but if you're decreasing it, it's 100 minus p upon 100. O-level students, IGCSE students, आप लोगों को exponential growth, decay याद आ रहा होगा यहाँ पे, ठीक है? So if you are increasing it by 5% in this case, for example, so your common ratio will be 100 plus the percentage that you're increasing it by divided by 100. So that means your common ratio is equals to 1.05. If you were decreasing it, it would be 100 minus 5 upon 100. That means 0.95. Okay, but since in Plan B, since you're increasing it by a constant amount, that means this is an arithmetic progression, in which case the common difference is equals to D. Okay? This is a geometric progression when you're increasing it by a fixed percentage, and the common ratio is 1.05. अच्छा ये भी पढ़ लेते हैं. If every preceding term is increased by a fixed percentage, p% of the preceding term, preceding means the term that comes after, preceding means the term that comes before, then the common ratio will be 100 plus p upon 100. But if it's less, if you're decreasing it, that means it's going to be 100 minus p. If every preceding term is increased / decreased by a fixed value, then it is an arithmetic progression. So just remember, fixed percentage means GP, fixed value means AP. Okay, अब वापस से वही सवाल आ गया, इसको सॉल्व करते हैं. अब देखो, the main problem in word problems is 99% of the time is finding out the number of years. ठीक है, उसका एक simple सा solution आप लोगों को बता देता हूँ, and that is go the extra mile. That's it. ठीक है, just go the extra mile. The thing is, we try to ego solve. We try to think, you know, there's got to be an easier way. There's got to be a formula. There's got to be a shortcut to everything. And in that process, what happens is we end up getting it wrong. So guys, please don't ego solve. Make sure that you go the extra mile. And if you go the extra mile, not only will you get the right, not only will you feel more confident about your solution, but you'll get the right answer also. Okay, so I'm solving this. Now pay attention. So in the starting year, the profit is 250,000. We are supposed to calculate the profit for the year 2008. Okay, so I'm going to take this as my starting value. Okay, so that means the value in the year 2000, which is from where we start calculating, it's equal to 1. Okay, that is the first term. 2001 mein, that means that's the second term. 2002 means it's going to be the third term. 2003 means that it's going to be the fourth term. Since we started in 2000, that means in 2008, I'm talking about which term? I'm talking about the 9th term. Simple as that. And what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to calculate the profit for the year 2008. That means we're supposed to calculate the nth term, not the total profit in these 8 years, but only the profit in the 9th year actually. Okay, considering that we are starting from 2000. So you do that, you calculate the 9th term, this is what you get. You calculate the 9th term, which means that you use n as 9. So since the formula is AR raised to the power n minus 1, this becomes 8. Please don't think that this 8 has a connection with this 2008. ऐसा नहीं है. We're calculating the 9th term, which is basically AR raised to the power 8, and this is what we get. ठीक है? अच्छा. Then part B says the total profit for the 10 years from 2000 to 2009 inclusive. Ab let's suppose either question हम पे एक मेहरबानी की, the question did us a favor and it told us that it's 10 years. But what if the question did not tell us that it's 10 years? The total profit for the year 2000 to 2009 inclusive. ठीक है? अब देखो, 2009 to 2000 inclusive is how many years? You might think that it's 9 years, but it's actually not 9 years, it's actually 10 years. Why? Because you're including the starting year and you're including the ending year also. ठीक है? How do you count inclusive? To count inclusive, the formula is last minus first plus 1. So 2009 minus 2000, that's equal to 10. that's equal to 9. 9 plus 1 is equals to 10. Okay? So for example, if I ask you how many terms are there from 1 to 5, you will say 5. But if I use the formula 5 minus 1, we get 4. So that's incorrect. 1 to 5 means I'm counting 1 and I'm counting 5. So that's why we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Similarly, how many terms are there from 1 to 11? 1 to 11 kitni terms hongi? Not 10. 11 terms only. Similarly, how many terms are there from how many years are there from 2000 to 2009? You have a total of 10 years. Why? Because 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, and 2009. That makes a total of 10 years. Okay? But here the question was nice in the sense that it gave us the number of terms, and that is the problem that students face when it comes to word problems of APGP, always calculating how many number of years there are. Acha. Plan in part 2, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to calculate the total profit. Total profit means the sum. So we calculate the sum using the sum formula. Again, does not matter which sum formula of GP you use, irrespective, you will get the same answer. This is what you end up with. Achha, then comes plan B, which says the annual profit would increase each year by a constant amount D. Find the value of D for which the total profit for 10 years, 2000 to 2009 inclusive, would be the same for both plans. Okay. Now, first of all, what is plan B? Plan B is arithmetic progression. What we have to do is we have to find out, okay, what should be the difference so that the total profit is the same. So that means we have to find out, okay, what should be the common difference so that the sum of these 10 terms, the profit each year, starting from 2000 to 2009, is equal to the same as this sum right here. Okay, so plan B is an arithmetic progression. Starting profit is 250,000. The common difference is D. We're talking about sum of the first 10 terms. So that's why you see 10 upon 2, and that's why you see 9D, because it's n minus 1. And this is basically what we get. Okay, again, the important part is finding out the number of years. अब जैसे यहाँ पे देख लेते हैं. Each year, a company gives a grant to a charity. The amount given each year increases by 5%. Its value in the preceding year, that means this is a geometric progression. The grant in 2001 was 5,000. That means 5,000 becomes our first term, and we have to find out the grant given in 2011. Okay, go the extra mile. You can see that the number at the end matches the number of terms. So that means 2011 would mean that we have to calculate the 11th term. So we do that. We calculate the 11th term. The formula is n minus 1. That's why you see 10 over here, and that's how you get the 11th term. Then it says the total amount of money given to the charity during the years 2001 to 2011. How many years do we have from 2001 to 2011 inclusive? We're going to do 2011 minus 2001, and because we have to include both terms, we're going to add 1 to it. Okay? That's why you can see that we're finding out the sum of the first 11 terms. So then you have questions like these. I solved questions like these in the APGP stream. Not difficult, but just make sure, although they can get extremely algebra intensive. Just for example, the first term, fifth term, and 15th term of an arithmetic progression are first 3 terms of a geometric progression. So that means this is, the first term is A, the 5th term is A plus 4D, the 15th term is A plus 14D, and since these are the first 3 terms of a geometric progression, that means these terms have a common ratio. So I can do second upon first equals to third upon second, cross multiply, and show that we get 3A equals to D. And then you can find out the common ratio by basically by using your answer to the part that you've already solved. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा, I've done multiple streams on APGP. ये APGP का अब से सबसे मुश्किल सवाल ये है. This came in May-June 2023, paper 12. So yeah, make sure to check it out. And yeah, I guess that takes care of APGP also. चलो ये भी देख लेते हैं. Let's go over this also. A television quiz show takes place every day. On day 1, the prize money is 1,000. If this is not won, the prize money is increased for day 2. The prize money is increased in a similar way until it is won. The television company considered the following 2 different models for increasing the prize money. Increase the prize money each by $1,000 each day. Increase the prize money by 10% each day. So if you're increasing it by a fixed amount, that means it's an arithmetic progression. If you're increasing it by a fixed percentage, that means it's a geometric progression. Okay, now, On each day the prize money is not won, the television company makes a donation to charity. The amount donated is 5% of the value on the prize that day. After 40 days, the prize money still has not been won. Calculate the total amount donated to charity. अब ये question जो है ना, ये बड़ा one of a kind question है, because it's just taking you for a ride basically. ठीक है, first it makes you think as if there is something to do with this that's going to come in the question, and then all of a sudden it just makes a U-turn. So now what you're dealing with is something completely different. How? I'll explain. So basically, if model 1 is used, that means the prize money will increase. It will increase by $1,000 each day. So in day 1 it's going to be 1,000, day 2 it's going to be 2,000, day 2 3,000, day 4 4,000, day 40,000. Okay, you can work this out just by following the pattern. Now the charity is always 5% of the value on that price day, and you might think this is going to be a geometric progression, but it's not. Why? Because if you calculate 5% of each of these values, you will notice that you end up with an arithmetic progression. Why? Because you're not increasing it by 5% each day. What you're doing is you're calculating 5% of a value that is increasing by a fixed amount each day. ठीक है, there's a difference. एक होता है कि हर दफ़ा 5% से increase करना. Here we're not doing that. Here we're calculating 5% of a value that is increasing by a fixed percent. Okay? So you notice that the charity given follows an arithmetic progression, and we're supposed to calculate the total amount donated to charity. That means the sum of 40 terms that follow this arithmetic progression, and we get 41,000. Acha. If model 2 is used, then that means the amount that is won will be increased by 10% each day, or it's going to be 1.1. Every following term will be 1.1 times of the previous one. So here you can see that we get what? We get the amount of money to be won for 4 days. And now if I calculate the charity, which is 5% of each value, what we get over here is a common ratio. We get terms in a geometric progression. So now to calculate the sum of money or the charity after 40 days, which means the sum of 40 terms of these geometric progression, we'll use the GP formula, and this is how we get the charity this is how we get the total charity after 40 days. ठीक हो गया? So इससे हमारा APGP भी हो गया. So अब आ जाते हैं coordinate geometry of a straight line पे. मैं इतने चैट खोल देता हूँ. See what's going on. वालेकुम अस्सलाम. या मैं बिस्किट खा रहा हूँ, बिस्किट और चाय. This is my refuel. Will this increase my grade by 5 marks? I don't know, beta. How am I supposed to know? How to avoid silly mistakes? Follow the 3-2-1 rule. This is a rule that programmers follow. Okay, after you write 3 lines of code, you pause for 2 seconds, you check it once. So you guys can apply that to math also. After you do 3 lines of working, pause for 2 seconds, check it once, and then move on. And whatever it is that you can check using your calculator, make sure that you check it so that you can make sure that your answer is correct. फॉर्मूला शीट बिल्कुल मिलेगी. I just ate a tissue paper. How did we get charity values? Charity values हमने calculate की by taking 5% of each value. Do not write in columns, guys. Columns में नहीं लिख सकते हैं. It's unacceptable. What to do after the stream? Just relax. Just go to bed. Remember, today should be spectator mode. Spectator mode means that you guys are just watching from the sidelines. Yeah, the thing is, मैं खाते हुए सोचता हूँ mic mute कर दूँ, but then, खैर. Yes, of course, beta, you will get MF19. Formula sheet आपको मिलेगी, of course. By column, I meant that you should avoid doing your work in columns. That's what I meant. ये कॉलम आप लोगों ने पहली बार सुने जो सब इतना परेशान हो रहे हैं. बेटा फॉर्मूला शीट का फ़ायदा है या नहीं, दैट इज़ अ डिफरेंट स्टोरी, बट यू विल गेट अ फॉर्मूला शीट. ओके, अच्छा कोई काम की बात है यहाँ पे या मैं रुकूँ या जाऊँ? So can we take sum of 40 terms, 40 values and find 5% of it? No, because the sum is calculated, the 5% is calculated of a different value each time. That's why you can't do that. अगर ऐसा होता ना कि 5% of the same value, then you could have done that. अच्छा कोई काम की बात? How to represent the range of x's on graph? Like sometimes we mark the wrong way. What do you mean by that? I don't know. Ali, जो आपकी बात कर रहे हो tan x equals to m, we have done this. I don't remember in which stream I discussed this, but when we were doing, I think, the differentiation stream, so I covered a question where we had to find out the gradient between two tangents, something like that. Okay, now let's talk about coordinate geometry. Coordinate geometry, here are all the concepts. Distance between 2 points, midpoint, gradient, equation of a straight line, perpendicular bisector, area of a polygon, properties of important shapes, angle between two lines, distance from a point to a straight line. अच्छा, अब ये जो सारे वो है ना, area of a polygon using the shoelace method, angle between two lines, and distance from a point to a straight line, distance between two parallel lines, these are rarely tested. Okay, but anyway, let's do them. So this is all, coordinate geometry is all formulas. Distance between 2 points, there's a formula for that. Midpoint, there's a formula for that. Gradient, there's a formula for that. And remember all the cases that if a line is upward sloping, it's going to have positive gradient, downward sloping, negative gradient, horizontal 0, vertical infinity. Parallel lines, remember, have the same gradient. If two lines are parallel, their gradient will be the same. If points are collinear, then collinear points will also give you the same gradient. Okay, so here you can see you have a straight line and there are 3 points lying on this line. That means the gradient of line AB will be a gradient that you get using the points AB will be the same as BC, will be the same as AC. Perpendicular lines, the product of the gradient of two perpendicular lines is -1. Or you can say that the gradient of one line will be negative reciprocal of the other. ठीक है, ये भी बोल सकते हैं. Okay, equation of a straight line. Now there are two ways that you can find out the equation of a straight line. And there is, wait, where is that? Y minus y1 equals to mx minus x1. मैंने कराया तो होगा, ऐसा हो नहीं सकता. Yeah, here it is. So either you can use y equals to mx plus c, the one that you use in O levels, or you can use y minus y1 equals to mx minus x1. In both cases, you need a gradient and you need a point through which the line is passing. Remember, an upward sloping line will have y equals to mx plus c. This is what its equation is going to look like. Downward sloping line will also have an equation that looks like this. But if there's a horizontal line, its equation will be y equals to c, where c is the point where the line cuts the y-axis. And if it's a vertical line, its equation will be x equals to b, where b is the point where the line cuts the x-axis. Okay? So if you have a vertical line, you don't need to put in a lot of effort to find out its equation. Same goes for a horizontal line also. Okay, acha, if the question does not specify, you can leave your answer in this form. Okay, you can leave your answer in this form also if the question does not specify. Make sure to read the question. If the question has a specific way that you should give your final answer, make sure to give your answer in that form only. Okay. Acha, some questions that I've solved. Equation of perpendicular bisector. So there are two things that you need to find out the equation. You need a gradient and a point. So if this is AB and you want to find out the equation of its perpendicular bisector, what you do is you first find out the midpoint of AB. Here's the midpoint. Then you find out the gradient of this line. Here's the gradient. But because the line that you're finding the equation of is perpendicular to it, so you'll have to take the negative reciprocal. So negative reciprocal of -1/2 becomes 2. And now using this point and this gradient, you find out the equation. Okay, this is the step-by-step working that you guys can review. Okay, some past paper questions. Remember, parallel lines have the same gradient. Also remember that if, for example, in this question you want the coordinates of C, so you will use the equation of line BC with the equation of line CD, solve them simultaneously, and what you will get as a result is the point at which they're intersecting. Okay? Then you have area of polygon. अब देखो, ये shoelace method जो है ना, there's a lot of controversy around it. I haven't come across a question which can only be solved using this method. You can always solve it using half into base into height. Okay? If you know this, that's great. If you don't, then there's really nothing to worry about. Okay? Because now is not a good time to go into a state of panic after realizing that there's something you don't know. One second. So the good thing about this formula is that you can apply it to any polygon there is. ठीक है? कैसे करते हैं मैं ये भी बता देता हूँ. So basically what you do is if it's a triangle, you start writing down the coordinates. Make sure you either write it in a clockwise direction or anti-clockwise direction. If the points are given to you, you best write it in that order only. Once you've written all the points, you write them vertically as column vectors, and then in the end you rewrite the point that you started with. You start multiplying from left to right. Okay, and you start adding the values. So -2 into -4 is 0, 0 into 6 is 0, 5 into 3 is 15. Then you start multiplying from right to left. -2 into 6 is -12, 5 into -4 is -20, 0 into 3 is 0. You add them up. Okay? Now you'll notice that I've put this line over here. This line means that your answer can't be negative because you're finding out area. So you do 23, which is the sum of these three terms, then -32, which is the sum of these three terms. You subtract them, they basically add, you get, I think 55, yeah, whatever you get, 55 I think. And then you multiply by half, so this is what the answer is. Okay, this is the shoelace method, but remember what I said, I haven't come across a question which can only be solved using this method, so just letting you guys know. So these are some properties that you must know. They will come in handy, especially when it comes to equation of circles and just general coordinate geometry questions. These properties आप लोग अच्छे से देख लीजिएगा. I've shared all these notes with you guys. There's a link in description where you can download them from. Some more example questions. Not too important. Okay, now. Coordinate geometry of a circle. So equation of circle. What is the general form of the equation of a circle? This is it. X minus a the whole thing square plus y minus b the whole thing square equals to r square, where a comma b is the center and r is the radius. Okay? अब देखो, in order to find out the equation of a circle, there is a checklist. You need to have the radius and the center. If you have these two things, you can find out the equation of a circle directly. Or you need 3 points on the circumference. If you have 3 points on the circumference, then you have enough information to find out the center and the radius also. Okay? अब ये class में I taught the derivation of the equation behind the circle. If you're interested, I've made a video on it. You can check it out. If not, then let's move on. Some basic questions, how to find out the equation of a circle using the center and the radius. Okay, but just remember that if you have it in this form, it's best that you convert it into completed square form and then you find out the center and the radius. Now I know there are alternative ways also, but I always prefer that you convert it in completed square form. कैसे करते हैं वो भी मैं दिखा देता हूँ. So for example, if you have x square plus y square minus 8x plus 20y plus 110 equals to 0, you will first write x square. then you will write minus 8x, you leave a bit of space for later. Then you write the two terms with y in them, you leave a bit of space, and then the constant you will shift across the equals to sign. Now you need to add something to bring this into completed square form. Who will decide what to add? The coefficient of x. The coefficient of x is 8. Divide that by 2, so that's 4. So this part of the expression will compress and become x minus 4 the whole thing square. Here you will add 10 because the coefficient of y is 20, so you need to add the square of 10. So this part of the expression will compress and become y plus 10 the whole thing square. Now whatever you did earlier on the left hand side, make sure to do it on the right hand side also. Okay, and then this is what you end up with. You have the coordinates of the center, you have the radius. I know there's an alternative way. Okay, this way you can just, okay, if you know it, that's great. If you don't, there's nothing to panic, there's nothing to worry about. All right, now if you're given the center and you're given a point through which the circle is passing, all you need is to find out the radius, which you can do by using the distance formula. If you're given the diameter, the endpoints of a circle, and you're supposed to find out the equation of a circle, once again you can use the midpoint to find out the center, and then with the coordinates of the center you can use any other point to find out the radius also. So that's enough to find out the equation of a circle. Now some circle properties to remember. Angle opposite the diameter is always 90 degrees. You will see why this property is important. Now notice here, the question says a circle passes through the points O, 0, 0, A, 8, 4, and B, 6, 6. Show that OA is the diameter of the circle and find the equation of the circle. So if I'm supposed to show that OA is the diameter, how will I do that? Remember, angle opposite the diameter is 90 degrees, and we have 3 points O, A, and B. So if OA is the diameter, that means point B, which is on the circumference, must be the point where we have a 90 degree angle. So if angle ABO is 90 degrees, then OB squared plus AB squared equals to OA squared. So you find out the distance AB, you find out the distance OB, you find out the distance AO, and you show that Pythagoras theorem fits perfectly, which proves that therefore OA is the diameter of the circle. Okay? Now, if you know that this is the diameter of the circle, you can calculate the midpoint, which will be the center of the circle. And then once you have the center, you can use any point you can use the center with A, O, or B, or you can even find out the distance OA, which is the diameter, divided by 2 for the radius, and then square it in the equation to find out the equation of a circle. So I've done an alternative way also by using the gradient. Again, some circle properties that you must remember. The perpendicular line from the center of a circle will bisect the chord. So if I draw a perpendicular line from the center to the chord, what it will do is it will bisect the chord, meaning it will cut it into half, and it will also be perpendicular since it's a perpendicular line. Once again, if I draw a perpendicular line from the center of the circle, it will also bisect the chord. AT and BT are two tangents. AT and BT are tangents to the circle at point A and B respectively. The property is when radius and tangent meet, they make a 90 degree angle, number one. And when two tangents meet at an external point, they're equal in length. Okay? There's a question also similar to this, जहाँ पे ये एक square बन जाते हैं. अच्छा. Also remember that if you have a kite, then the properties of kite also hold now. Okay, what are the properties of kite? That the diagonals, they intersect at 90 degrees. Okay? This line, if this line is a horizontal line, then this line will be a vertical line. Why? Because the diagonals of a kite are perpendicular. Okay, so a lot of times you have to use this property to maybe find out. We did a question, I think it was in the mock or something, where we had to use this property to find out, I think it was the point of intersection of the two tangents or something like that. Okay, so this property is also very important. And मैं यहाँ पे लिखा भी है, OT and AB will be perpendicular. Now, how will you find out the equation of a circle if you're given 3 points through which it's passing? Okay, and no points are endpoints of the diameter. So first things first, you will find out the perpendicular bisector of PQ, because if you have a chord and you find out the equation of its perpendicular bisector, the perpendicular bisector will pass through the center. Then once you've done that, you will find out the equation of the perpendicular bisector of QR, as it too will pass through the center. ठीक है, कोई से भी दो chords की आपने equation of perpendicular bisector निकालनी है. Once you've done that, once you found the equation of the perpendicular bisector of two chords, you will solve them simultaneously, because when you solve them simultaneously, you will get the coordinates of the center. You can check that box. Then using these coordinates with any other point, you can find out the radius, and that's it. You will be able to find out the equation of a circle. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा, some questions. I've done lots and lots of streams on circles. Make sure to check it out. ठीक है? Abhi now is not a time to go into that, but एक सवाल which I would like to go over जिसमें वो square बन जाता है, वो एक अच्छा सवाल है. I'd like to go over that. Oh, इत्तेफाक से वही खुल गया. Okay, now here what happens is बात शुरू होती है कि हमें प्रूव करना होता है कि एक एंगल है 45 degrees, that the angle CT is 45, which means that since the two triangles that we get are congruent, meaning they're exactly identical, this angle is also 45. Radius and tangent meet at 90 degrees, so this is also 45. This angle will also be 45 since you have a triangle with one 90 degree angle, one 45 degree angle. So this angle will also be 45, which means what you're dealing with as a result is a square. If you're dealing with a square, now I know this is a hideous square to look at, but it's a square nonetheless because of the properties. I बनाने से पहले तो हमें नहीं पता ना कि it's a square, but we later on realized that the shape that we're dealing with is a square, which tells us that the two diagonals will intersect at midpoint, and I think we had to do something to do with, there was something to do with that. Find the equation of the line AB, giving your answer in the form y equals to mx plus c. Yeah, so basically we had to use the gradient of line TC and take the negative reciprocal of it so that we have the gradient of line AB since they're perpendicular. But this would be the case even if we weren't getting a square, we were getting a kite, this would still hold. But we were able to find out a point because the midpoint of these two is the same as the midpoint of AB. Why? Because we're dealing with a square, and that is how we were able to form the equation. ठीक हो गया? Now, this is something that I wanted to go over. I would encourage you to look at the stream if you want, where I've solved this question. But anyway, if you know what I'm talking about, then there's no need to. So let's look at circular measure. फिर हम थोड़ा chat खोलेंगे, थोड़ा chit chat करेंगे. फिर we will look at the remaining questions. Okay, this circle is giving me OCD. Should probably fix this. No need to know what radian is right now, okay? But conversion is very important. How to convert degree to radian? You multiply it by pi upon 180. Acha, remember, whenever you see a circular measure question, please don't be unnecessarily creative. ये आर्ट्स का पेपर नहीं है, बहुत शौक आ रहा है तो आप लोग आर्ट्स पढ़ लें कि मैं इसको पहले डिग्री में कर लेता हूँ या कर लेती हूँ, फिर मैं इसको कन्वर्ट कर लूँगा into radian later. ठीक है, same goes for if you're solving a trigonometric equation where the range is given to you in radian mode. Okay, no need to get creative, no need to take unnecessary risk. Okay, no need to become a daredevil, just do it in radian only, because all the formulas that we have of circular measure are designed for radian mode. Okay, so how do we convert from degree to radian? Ye bhi dekh lo, so that you know like what is 30 degrees equal to, you know what is 60 degrees equal to, stuff like that. You multiply by pi upon 180. The other way around, if you want to go from radian to degree, you multiply by 180 upon pi. Achha, here are all the formulas, which once again, you don't have to memorize, but I've done a derivation of these formulas, which you guys can look at if you want. Take it right now, the derivation part is not important. Just remember that circular measure is all about formulas and it's all about planning. Get the formula right, get the plan right, that's it, you'll be able to solve. Okay? Because कोई भी question solve करने के लिए, you will notice in circular measure, you don't have to familiarize yourself with a certain concept. All you have to do is come up with a better plan. Maybe you were unable to solve because your plan was not good. So all you have to do is come up with a better plan. As soon as you come up with a better plan, you're going to be able to solve. I'm talking about questions where you have to find out the perimeter or perhaps the area of shaded region. All you need is a good solid plan, and then you're going to be able to get the job done. Just give me a minute. Okay, so some questions. The length of arc AB. What's the formula for arc length? That's your formulas, dekh lo. For area of circle, it's pi r square. Why? Because there's no involvement of angle. For circumference of a circle, 2 pi r. Once again, because there is no involvement of an angle. For area of sector, there are two formulas. Half r square theta or half rs. Okay? So just give me a break, guys. Just 1 minute.
need any help with that, inshallah, I'll take it.
Okay, guys. Sorry about that. 8:45 pe we'll take another break for namaz, and then we'll try to wrap it up inshallah by 9:30. We're on track to wrap it up by 9:30. We're on the 8th chapter and we have trigonometry, functions, differentiation, integration left, so we'll do that inshallah. Okay, so these are all the formulas that you have to keep in mind. Now once again, expect use of these three, but whenever you're using these three, make sure that your calculator is in radian mode. Okay? Now please remember, nobody's going to come in and whisper into your ear that you have to bring your calculator, you have to turn your calculator into radian mode. You will have to figure that out yourself. ठीक हो गया? Now, let's look at some complicated questions so that I can teach you guys about the planning part. अब देखो, अब जैसे यहाँ पे, for example, you're supposed to calculate the perimeter of the shaded region. Now remember, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what are all the lengths that I need to calculate the perimeter of the shaded region. So I want this ADC, the arc length. So you can see that I've written that down. I want AB. You can see I've written that down. And I want the length BC. You can see I've written that down. Now they're both equal. अब इससे फ़ायदा क्या होगा? What's the benefit of this? This is going to give me a direction to go in. Okay, if I know what direction to go in, then that means half the work is done. Okay, compared to me just randomly figuring out what I have to do, randomly using, some randomly using formulas, trying to find some value without knowing the objective, without knowing the reason why we're doing what we're doing is obviously not a good situation to be in. Okay, so now notice that there's a circle property, although this 90 degree is already given, but you have the radius and a tangent and they're meeting, so that means it's going to be a 90 degree angle. Okay, so we draw this, we take a look at this triangle, and then we find out the missing length. Once you have this length, then you can find out the arc length also. You can find out the arc length anyway. Okay, so you'll have to use sum of interior angles. Now sum of interior angles is 180, but in this case it's going to be pi. So when you draw a line from here, what will happen is this angle will be divided into 2. Okay, so pi upon 3, when you divide that by 2, is pi upon 6. 90 is pi upon 2. So pi upon 2 minus pi upon 6. From pi, you get the missing angle, which is 1 upon 3 pi. And now you have everything you need, all the ingredients to find out the perimeter, because all you have to do now is find out this length. Okay, this is the radius, so that means this will also be the radius. And you can then find out the arc length and add these two lengths, which will both be the same, by the way, no need to work them out separately, and you will get the perimeter of the shaded region. Now, to find out the area, you'll have to plan once again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out half the area of the shaded region. How? By first finding out the area of the triangle, and from the area of triangle I will subtract the area of sector, and then I'll double it, because if I do triangle minus sector, I will get half the area of the shaded region, and then if I double it, what do I get? This is what I end up with. Okay? So keep your answer in exact terms till you reach the very end, and make sure to read the question. Sometimes the question, like for example here, it says give your answer in terms of root 3 and pi. So make sure you do that only. Now here, we want to write down the area of the shaded region. One important thing is this. The diagram shows triangle ABC with AB equals to BC. The arc CD, this is the arc, is part of a circle with center A and ABD is a straight line. So that means this is the radius, and whatever this length turns out to be, this length will also be the same. And you can see that you're in a situation where you have two sides and an included angle. That means you can use cosine rule to find out this length. And whatever this length is going to be, this length is going to be the same. Why? Because A is part of a circle. A is part of a circle with center A, and CD is the arc. Okay, so basically this is what you're looking at. Okay, A is the center of a circle and CD is the arc. So that means any length from the center to the circumference will be the radius, and that's going to help you calculate this length also. And then this is the missing length. Actually, no, there's no missing length. This is the length that you will have to calculate, which you can calculate by using the arc length formula. Since you're dealing with an isosceles triangle, that means this angle and this angle will both be the same. So you can see, to find out the missing angle, we do pi minus 1.8 divided by 2. And then we have all the ingredients to find out the perimeter of the shaded region. To calculate the area of the shaded region, simply plan that you need to first find out the area of the bigger shape, which is sector, from which you need to subtract the area of triangle, and that's how you're going to get your answer. Then there are some more questions that I've solved. You guys can, I'm not going to be going through the detail of every single question. The idea is that you understand the planning part. Okay, the planning is essential before you solve a question, and it's going to give you a sense of direction. You can look at the past paper streams if you want, although I will not recommend that you do that the day before the exam. Okay, you might come across a difficult question and just go into a state of panic. That's the last thing that you want. Okay, now let's talk about trigonometry. Before that, let me open the chat for a while, see what you guys are up to. So this is a question from before. How do you understand if it is AP or GP? Dekho, if it is increasing by a fixed value, it's AP. If it's increasing by a fixed percentage, it's GP. Sir, अगर आप पेपर दें तो आपकी distinction आएगी. I'll probably end up making a silly error or something. Column working, beta, just don't divide your page in columns and then solve. That's what it means. इसमें इतना परेशानी क्या बात है? Don't do this. Don't divide your work in columns and then solve, and don't treat it as two imaginary columns. Okay, first you do your working in this direction and then you do your working in this direction. This is wrong. Okay, so utilize all the space here, then here, then here, then here, then here. ठीक है. Biscuits मैं खा रहा था. I think saltish थे. Extra sheet avoid करें. Extra sheet avoid करें. ठीक है. अपने स्पेस को efficiently utilize करें so that you can avoid using an extra sheet. ठीक है, extra sheet की ज़रूरत नहीं पड़ेगी आपको, unless बहुत कम ऐसे questions होते हैं where you have to borrow an extra sheet, but majority of the cases you don't. Half RS formula? Half RS formula is half into radius into arc length. Redo method, in which video do you explain? I've explained it in functions. Okay, and I've done a dedicated video, not this year. I think it was last year where I did a dedicated video on redo. उसको आप search कर लो कि domain and range of composite function and write the name of my channel. You'll find out. Sir, kadak chai or Kashmiri chai? Kadak chai, of course. ठीक हो गया. So anything important? I don't think so. How can I find roots of a cubic equation? Not part of the P1 syllabus. Most mark-worthy chapter is coordinate geometry of a circle. Along with that, there's differentiation, integration, trigonometry. नहीं बेटा, you cannot do your working by dividing the page into half. ठीक है, I've mentioned that multiple times. Please don't do that. There is a chance that the examiner will not be able to follow your working, and do you want that? Of course not. Okay, now let's talk about trigonometry. So the concepts that we have to cover in trigonometry are graphs, trigonometric graphs with transformation, introduction to quadrants, basic trigonometric equations, trigonometric equations with range altering, trigonometric identities. Okay, basic trigonometric graphs, you should know immediately whether the graph is of sine, cos or tan, and you should know immediately how to draw the basic shapes of sine, cos and tan. ठीक है? अच्छा. Now this is the graph of y equals to sine, this is the graph of y equals to cos, this is the graph of y equals to tan. ठीक है? Let's take a look at the graph of y equals to sine x. This is what you get. Maximum value is 1, minimum value is -1. Amplitude is calculated by looking at the graph, and it's the maximum value minus the minimum value divided by 2. Natural period is 360 degrees or 2 pi, because that is the number of degrees after which one cycle ends and the other cycle, and then the cycle starts to repeat. Okay? 360 degrees in degree and 2 pi in radians. For cos, it's 360 degrees or 2 pi. Okay, this is the shape of the graph. Same goes for amplitude. Amplitude is also 1. Maximum value is 1. Minimum value is -1. So whenever we are drawing the graph of sine and cos, I'm talking about sine x and cos x. The step that we take is 90. Okay? When we are drawing the graph of tan, the step that we take is 45, meaning we plug in values after every 45-degree interval. Now, tan has something special in its graph, and that is asymptote. Okay, asymptote are basically infinite dotted lines that the graph gets closer and closer to, but it never touches, let alone cuts. So, tan ka jo period hota hai is basically 180 degrees. Okay, it's at 180 degrees, one cycle ends, and then the other cycle starts, which is why from 0 to 360, how many cycles do we see? We see 2 cycles. A lot of people think cycles has to do with the coefficient of x. That's not the case. Okay? Cycles depends on 2 things: the range that you're given and the period of the graph itself. The graph of tan has no amplitude because it has no maximum value, it has no minimum value. And this is the basic shape of each graph that you must remember. Especially you should know when the graph of sine is 0, 1 and -1, and you should know when the graph of cos is 0, 1 and -1. Okay? Now I've done some alterations. Okay? ultimately this is what you need to know. You need to know this. This is a cheat sheet kind of a thing. Okay, if you have the graph of y is equals to a sine bx or a cos bx plus c or a tan bx plus c, you can find out the amplitude by just looking at the positive coefficient of the trigonometric function, meaning you take the positive value of it. If, for example, this is minus 2 sine x, the amplitude 2 hoga. If, for example, it's 3 cos x, then the amplitude will be 3. But if you're given the graph in front of you, you can calculate the amplitude by using this formula. And the amplitude formula only applies to sine and cos, because the graph of tan has no amplitude to begin with. Now, the coefficient of x, which is b in these cases, determine the period. To find out the new period, you do 360 divided by the coefficient of x. For sine and cos, for tan, it's 180 divided by the coefficient of x, or pi if it's in radian, and 2 pi if it's for sine and cos in radian. So ये formula याद रखो. New period equals to the natural period divided by the coefficient of x. Now new step, meaning that if you're supposed to draw the curve, and remember we're always sketching it. So in that case we follow a new step rule, meaning that if we have to, let's say, draw the graph of sine 2x, or if we have to draw the graph of sine 3x, then the step that we will take also needs to change. We can't plug in values after every 90-degree interval. And the way that we calculate the new step is 90 divided by the coefficient of x. Step kya hai? Step hai after how many degrees will we plug in, or how many radians will we plug in values in place of x to find out y values. But notice that there is a star here. Reason why I put a star here is because the step depends on the grid given. Sometimes we decide the step by looking at the grid. If, for example, the grid has values after every pi upon 6 radian interval, then we plug in values according to that. ठीक है, irrespective के हमारे formula से जो भी step आ रहा हो. ठीक है, I'll see if I come across an example question where I can elaborate on this, but I've already explained this in my trigonometry stream. So here you can see when drawing the graph of y equals to sine 2x, my step has changed to 45 degrees. ठीक हो गया. Some examples, when drawing the graph of cos 3x, you can see my step has changed from pi upon 2, which is the radian equivalent of 90, divided by 3, which is equal to pi upon 6. ठीक हो गया. अच्छा, how do you find out the equation from the graph? ये भी देख लो, this is important. So if you have the graph of sine, which we can see here, this is what it is. So first you look at the amplitude, which is the maximum value divided by the minus the minimum value divided by 2. I know people use the baseline method. I don't like that. Okay, so maximum value is 9. The minimum value is 1. So 9 minus 1 upon 2, that's the amplitude. Amplitude is always the coefficient of the trigonometric function. Now notice that its period is equal to pi. That means one cycle is taking pi radians. Now what is the formula to calculate the new period? It's equal to 2 pi divided by the coefficient of x. We can see the new period is pi. We know that the natural period is 2 pi divided by the coefficient of x, which gives us the value of bs2. Now the graph of sine, unless you add or subtract something from it, is supposed to start from 0. Irrespective of the amplitude, the graph of sine always starts from 0. Now what will cause a graph to not start from 0? When you add something to it. So what must be added to 0 to make sure the graph starts from 5? The answer is 5. And the alternative method is that you can plug in a value in place of x and y and find out the value of c. Okay? And then the same way you can solve other questions also. Achha, basic trigonometry, remember the 4 quadrants that ASTC that we need in order to solve trigonometric equations. Okay? Achha, is tarah ke questions, although are rare, but I have seen them in past papers. If, for example, you're given the value of sine theta equals to 2 upon 5, and you're given that theta is obtuse, that means theta is an angle that's in the second quadrant. Just by looking at sine theta and seeing that it's positive, that means it could be in the first or second. But then later on, when the question mentions that theta is obtuse, that means it's in the second quadrant only. And now we have to find out the value of cos theta and tan theta, keeping in mind that theta is an angle that's in the second quadrant, which means that this is the home ground of sine, and cos and tan, their ratios will be negative. So first we draw a 90-degree triangle. Using these values, the opposite is 2, the hypotenuse is 5, so that we can work out the adjacent. And then we find out the value of cos theta, which is adjacent over hypotenuse, but because this is the third quadrant, we're going to write it with the minus sign. Same goes for tan theta, because it's opposite upon adjacent, and because it's the third quadrant, we will give it with the minus sign. If you leave the denominator in irrational form, this is what you get. If you rationalize it, this is what you get. Okay? And then there are other examples of this. Acha, here I've talked about how to use your calculator, trigonometric equations. Trigonometric equations, may remember that you're always given a range. Range decides how many solutions you want. First thing you do is you find out alpha by taking cos inverse of the positive value. Then you look at the equation, see that it's negative, which means it could be in the second and the third quadrant. And then if it's in the second quadrant, the solution will be theta minus alpha. The third quadrant will be, 180 minus alpha. And then the third quadrant will be 180 plus alpha. Okay? Always look at the range before you write down your solution. Acha, whenever you take the square root on both sides, there is a plus minus. That means you will have two solutions. So you'll have a total of two solutions. And then possibly in the end, you can have four solutions, okay? Two solutions because when you take the square root, you have plus minus, and four solutions because every solution can lead to two values of x or two values of theta. And since you have two solutions, so in total, you can get four. If it's in radian mode, then make sure that your calculator is also in radian mode. So then there are some trick questions where you have to solve sin x equals to 0. If you try to use the ASTC method or if you try to use your calculator to solve this, your calculator is not going to be of any help. What you have to do is you have to recall the shape of the graph and realize that sin x is equals to 0 at 0, 180 and 360. Very important. Same goes for cos x equals to 1. If you use your calculator, you'll notice that it's not going to be of much help. Why? Because cos x equals to 1 can only be seen from the graph that it's equal to 1 at 0 and it's equal to 1 at 360. Same goes for tan x equals to 0. It's equal to 0 at 0, 180 and 360. Okay, now this quadratic equation, you can either rewrite tan x and change it into something else, or you can do it as it is. Okay? Achha, whenever you have a range which allows you to go beyond a complete cycle, how do I know that? Achha guys, 8:50 okay? It's time for Isha break. So I'm going to take a quick 10-minute break. Take a namaz padhte hain. You guys should also pray. And then we'll resume. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick 10-minute namaz break. Okay. So we were dealing with trigonometric equations. So remember, in trigonometric equations, if the range exceeds 360, if the range allows you to go beyond one cycle, how do you find out solutions in the next cycle? You find out solutions in the next cycle by adding 360 to the existing solutions. Okay? For example, over here, we get our first two solutions, 30 and 150, but notice that there is still room for more. So how do we find out the remaining solutions? We find out the remaining solutions by adding 360 to our existing solutions, okay? And if you have a negative range, how do you deal with a negative range? There are two ways. One is that you go in a clockwise direction. So if the range is from minus 360 to 0, that means theta. So what are the properties of theta? It's if you go in if it's positive, you go in an anti-clockwise direction. If it's negative, you go in a clockwise direction. So now we're going to go in a clockwise direction. Okay, we find out alpha, which is 45. Cos is negative, which means it's going to be in the second and the third quadrant. But because we're going in a clockwise direction, we will write our answer with a minus sign. So this is 135 degrees, but because we've gone in a clockwise direction, we will write minus 135. This will be 180 plus 45, which is 225, but because we've gone in a clockwise direction, we will write it with a minus sign. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा. Then there are some cases where you have to find out when you have to do range altering. Just for example over here, if you have sine 2x equals to 0.5. How will we know that we have to alter the range? Notice that the range that's given to you is for x and the angle in the equation is 2x. So this is the moment where you realize that you have to alter the range. How will you alter the range? You'll bring it equal to the angle that's in the question, which means you'll multiply everything by 2 and this is the new range. Now every solution of 2x should inside be the 2x range and every solution of x should inside be the x range. So you find out alpha. You find out the first two solutions by looking at the quadrants that they're in. First quadrant is alpha, second quadrant is 180 minus alpha, and this is what you get. Now notice that your range for 2x allows you to go beyond one cycle. So how will you find out the solutions in the next cycle? You add 360. Now you have all the solutions for 2x, which should be in the 2x range. You find out the values of x by dividing everything by 2, and that should be in the range of x. Okay? Here below I've done some example questions, which you can take a look at. Okay? And yeah. There you go. But just remember that if you have negative, okay, if the range allows you to go on, if the range allows you to go on the negative side, then what you do is you go in a clockwise direction, or you can subtract 2 pi from the solutions in the first quadrant to see if that's inside the range or not. Okay, just say for example, let me see if I can come across a question. Yeah, so for here, notice that our new range is from minus 30. First of all, why did we have to alter the range? Because the angle was x minus 30, and this was the range for x. So our new range allows us to go on the negative side. So I will find out the first two solutions. Okay, so that's 60, 180 minus 60 and 180 plus 60. Now, because range में थोड़ा सा negative की भी गुंजाइश है, तो हम double check करेंगे. We'll subtract 360 from our existing solutions and see whether those values that we get are inside the range or not. Since they're not inside the range, we're not going to consider them. But if let's suppose they did end up inside the range, we would have considered them. ठीक है? अच्छा, now let's talk about trigonometric identities. First of all, what is the difference between an equation and an identity? Identity is something that is true for all values. Equation is something that is true for a fixed number of values. Maybe like one value, two values, something like that. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब trigonometric identities को solve करने की the only 2-3 identities that we have are these. Sin theta upon cos theta equals to tan theta. And then you can memorize a slight variation of it, that tan square theta equals to sin square theta upon cos square theta, and sin square theta plus cos square theta equals to 1. Okay, these are the only identities that we have. In A2, in P3 math, you start finding lots and lots of identities, but in AS, this is all we have. Okay? Now, some rules regarding identities. Always start with the more complex side. Doesn't matter whether it's a left-hand side or right-hand side. There is no such rule that you need to start with the left-hand side and bring it equal to the right-hand side. You can do the opposite also. always be open to trial and error. So be open to the idea of trial and error, which is why the space that you're given, make sure that you utilize it efficiently so that if you get it wrong, you can do it again within the same space. And you'll always notice that the space given to you is generous given that you utilize it efficiently. Always bring every trigonometric function in terms of sine and slash or cos, which means because every identity that you have, like for example, we only have tan, but you have to bring everything in terms of sine and cos because every identity is dependent on sine and cos. Watch out for the third algebraic identity. So this is very important. ये होगी और आप सोच भी नहीं सकते हैं कि ये identity हमें लगानी है because you will be so busy thinking about a trigonometric identity that you will totally lose track of the fact that you have to find out. You have to apply an algebraic identity. Do not treat it like an equation, meaning do not move values from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. And in the end, don't forget to write left-hand side equals to right-hand side, hence proved. Achha, ek aur cheez which I would like to add over here is this. That you can also work on the right-hand side. You can work on both hands simultaneously. Mentally, meaning formally you work on this and mentally you work on the right-hand side so that you know, okay, what I need to bring it equal to. Like for example, if I'm looking at tan x, I know that in order to bring the left-hand side equal to tan x, it should be equal to sin x upon cos x. So it's not that I'm working on both sides simultaneously. I'm working on one side, but I'm just taking the right-hand side apart so that I know what to do on the left-hand side. Okay, let me give you another example of it. I'll just say, for example, here, it's cos x plus tan x. So now when I'm looking at the right-hand side, I'm not going to work on the right-hand side. I'll work on the left-hand side only. But tan x ko mujhe pata hai ki even if I get the left-hand side as cos x plus sin x upon cos x, that's going to get the job done. Okay? So you can work on both sides, one side formally by writing it down, the other side just informally in your head to know what should be your next step. ठीक हो गया? Okay, now after trigonometric identities, there are complementary angle identities. Make sure that you have these memorized, although there are very rare cases where we have to use them, but still they're part of the syllabus. Then you have supplementary angle identities, same as O-levels, except that now you have tan also. Okay? And then you have negative angle identities, also something that you must know. We did a question yesterday when we were doing transformation of functions where we didn't have to use it, but we could have used it, and we did use it, and we gave our answer. And yeah, ठीक है, ये identities आपको याद होनी चाहिए. Okay, I don't think there is a past paper question where you have to use such identities, but like I said, they are still important. ठीक है? अच्छा, एक चीज़ और देख लो. One thing that I'd like to point out is that whenever you're solving a trigonometric equation which has range in radians and all your answers turn out to be in terms of pi, I thought I mentioned it, but I didn't, then do a little something known as a sneak peek. ठीक है? Sneak peek क्या है मैं समझा भी देता हूँ और करके दिखा भी देता हूँ. So it's difficult for us to compare. Yeah, like for example over here. This is the equation, this is the range. Okay? Now when we start solving, you can see that our answer is in terms of pi and our new range is also in terms of pi. So first of all, we alter the range. What rule do we follow to alter the range? We follow BODMAS, meaning we first divide by 2. Okay, so we divide both sides by 2 and then we add pi upon 6. So now we get our new range, which is x upon 2 plus pi upon 6. And the left-hand side becomes pi upon 6. The right-hand side becomes 13 of pi upon 6. How? You first divide by 2, then you add pi upon 6. ठीक है? अब देखो, it'll be difficult for me to figure out when to stop looking at these values. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly write down the decimal value of pi upon 6 and I'm going to write down the decimal value of 6.81. ठीक है? इससे क्या होगा? As I'm working this out, so sine is positive, that means it's going to be in the first and the second quadrant. So the solution in the first quadrant will be the same as alpha, which is pi upon 4. Solution in the second quadrant will be pi minus alpha, that's 3 upon 4 pi. Now, because my range allows me to go slightly beyond a complete cycle, I can see that it's greater than 2 pi, right? So I know that I can go beyond a full cycle. So I will add 2 pi to it, and when I do that, I'll get 9 upon 4 pi. I'll quickly look at the decimal value of 9 upon 4 pi using my calculator feature where you convert from the standard form to decimal form. Okay, and then I will notice that it's more than 6.81 because it's difficult for me to compare 9 upon 4 pi with 13 upon 6 pi. But it's easier for me to compare the decimal value of this with the decimal value of this, and I'll instantly realize that this is outside the range, and then I'll give the final answer by simply subtracting pi upon 6 from the two acceptable values. ठीक हो गया? So this is it as far as trigonometry is concerned. There is a calculator feature in your calculator which you can use to draw graphs. Okay, I've talked about that. I've made videos on it also. Make sure to check it out. It will come in handy for you to, so that you can make sure that you can check your answer. अच्छा, अब आ जाते हैं functions पे. अच्छा, transformation of functions में आज बस एक बहुत ही brief सा recap करूँगा. Not gonna go in detail because we just did that yesterday only. Okay, yesterday and day before. I don't know if it was day before or the day before yesterday, but anyway. Now, what is a function? A function is a relation where every input has only one output. Okay. So relation is basically an equation. Input is domain, output is your range / image. Okay. Not every relation is a function. Not every equation that you see, every equation that you can form is going to be a function. Function की एक specific condition है, and that is every input should have only one output. Okay. Now, function can be of two types. A one-to-one function, which means that one input gives one output. For example, linear, exponential. A one-to-one function will either always increase or decrease, but not both. Meaning, it's either always going to be an increasing function or decreasing, but not something that's oscillating, increasing, decreasing. That's a many-to-one function. Many or multiple inputs give the same output. Could be quadratic, cubic, trigonometric. A many-to-one function will be increasing and decreasing. Now, one-to-many relation होता है, one-to-many function नहीं होता, ठीक है? So, and whenever one input gives multiple outputs, that means it is not a function. Okay? If one input gives multiple outputs, that means it is not a function. What is it then? It is a relation. Okay? And here's an example of it. Achha. Here are some basics. अब ये देख लो, this is an example of a one-to-one function because it's constantly going in one direction. Also an example of a one-to-one function constantly going in one direction. Example of a many-to-one function. Why? Because it's going in both directions. It's decreasing as well as increasing. This is a circle, which is an example of a one-to-many relation. We never say that one-to-many function is not a function. ठीक है, वो तो हमने अपनी बात ही contradict कर ली. That first we're calling it a function and then we're saying it's not a function. So we're just contradicting ourselves. Does not make any sense. ठीक है? Achha, then you have a trigonometric function, which is also an example of a many-to-one function. Achha, then there are some graphical tests which can only be applied if the graph is given. Vertical line test, which is to distinguish a function from a non-function. Horizontal line test, which is to distinguish a one-to-one function from a many-to-one function. The criteria of passing is that it cuts at only 1 point. The criteria of failing is that it cuts at more than 1 point. Just say, for example, if I apply the vertical line test here, it only cuts at 1 point, which means it is a function. If I apply the horizontal line test here, it cuts at 1 point, which means not only is it a one-to-one function, but it's, or not only is it a function, but it's a one-to-one function. Same goes for here, function be a one-to-one be a. Here it is a function, but because the horizontal line cuts it twice, that means it is not a one-to-one function. This is not a function to begin with, so we're not going to apply the horizontal line test. This is a function, but if I apply the horizontal line test, we can see that it's cutting it at 2 points. That means it's not a one-to-one function. It's a many-to-one function. अच्छा, अब आ जाते हैं डोमेन एंड रेंज पे, जो सबका पेन पॉइंट है. देखो, डोमेन एंड रेंज for simple linear functions is straightforward as to how to find out the domain. You simply plug in the endpoints, you write your answer in range form, like for example in a straight line. Quadratic curve ka, the best way to find out the range is by making a rough sketch. Simple as that. Okay? The best way to find out the range is by making a rough sketch and seeing whether the turning point, which is going to be the minimum point if it's a minimum curve, falls inside the domain or not. If it does, then the y value becomes the minimum value and the maximum value you can find by plugging in either of the endpoints. But you have to make a rough sketch. Agar aap soch rahe ho ki there's a formula, there's a trick, there's a hack, I'm afraid there isn't any. Okay? So in order to find out the range of a one-to-one function, we can simply plug in the two endpoints of the domain and give the answer in range form. But in order to find out the range of a many-to-one function, we have to make a sketch to find out the maximum/minimum value before stating the range. Okay, a quadratic function by nature is a many-to-one function, but I can alter its domain to turn it into a one-to-one function. Meaning, if I chop off this half and only take the values of x that are greater than or equal to h or simply greater than h, it becomes a one-to-one function. or if I make them lesser than or equal to h or less than h, it becomes a one-to-one function. Okay? If the x-coordinate of the turning point is inside the domain, then it's a many-to-one. If the x-coordinate of the turning point is outside the domain, then it's a one-to-one function. Again, some examples where we have learned how to find out the range of a quadratic function. Acha. When you have functions like these, इसमें the rule is, as I mentioned, you have to get friendly with the function. देखो quadratic को तो हम sketch करके निकाल लेंगे, no big deal. Okay, if the domain is x is lesser than or equal to -1, that means we'll make a rough sketch. This is a maximum curve with 0, 2 as its turning point. Okay, you can see I've written it in completed square form. But the domain is lesser than or equal to -1. That means we're only allowed to look at this part of the function. Now, when we plug in -1, we see that the y value is -1, and every other value for this part of the graph will be less than -1. So therefore, the range is lesser than or equal to -1. अब इसको हम स्केच कर सकते हैं, ठीक है, लेकिन इसकी स्केचिंग वैसे तो हमारे ओ लेवल के सिलेबस में भी रिसेंटली ऐड हुई है, तो आप लोगों को पता होनी चाहिए, बट कि इसका एक एसिम्प्टोट होगा 2 पे, ठीक है, और कोई लिमिट नहीं होगी. बट अगर नहीं पता तो इट्स ओके, यू कैन स्टार्ट बाय सिंपली गेटिंग फ्रेंडली विद द फंक्शन. हाउ? बाय फर्स्ट प्लग इन 0, ठीक है, ये रैशनल फंक्शंस हैं. By plug in 0, what do you get infinity. Why? Because anything divided by 0 is infinity. Achha, then there will come a point where as the value of x, since it has no upper limit, if I plug in infinity into the function, तो क्या होगा, 1 के नीचे एक बहुत बड़ी वैल्यू आ जाएगी, which means that this whole thing is simply as good as 0 and 0 plus 2 is simply as good as 2. So the whole thing will approach 2. That means the greatest it's going to be is infinity, the least it's going to be is 2, so therefore the range is simply greater than 2. Okay, you can see there is no upper limit and the upper limit is 2, therefore the range is greater than 2. Once again, start by plugging in 0. If you plug in 0, you get 3. If you plug in infinity, you notice that it's approaching 0, which means the range is from 0 to 3. Okay? Again, this is to find out the range. If it's a quadratic function, make a rough sketch. If it's a trigonometric function, make a sketch. But if it's anything like this and you can't make a sketch, then your safest bet is by getting friendly with the function and then observing a pattern. Okay? Okay, now. Composite functions is a function that is made up of 2 or more functions. So composite functions, f of g of x means that you plug in function g in function f. G of f of x means that you plug in function f in function g. F of f o, yeah, f square o does not mean that you square the function. It simply means that you plug in f into f. Okay? Achha, some examples. This is the famous redo concept. Formation of composite function. A composite function can only be formed if the range of the inner function is equal to the domain of the outer function. Okay, fg can only exist if the range of g is equal to the domain of f. इसको याद रखो redo से. Range of inner equals to domain of outer. gf can only exist if the range of f is equal to the domain of g. Okay, I've done some example questions. I've done a dedicated stream on this, multiple streams on this. In the last function stream also, I solved multiple questions. Okay, abhi I'll just go over one question. Okay, find the domain of g for which gf exists, for which this function exists. So for gf to exist, the range of the inner function, that means the range of f must be equal to the domain of the outer function. That means it must be equal to the domain of g. Achha, what is the range of f? The range of f can simply be found by plugging in 4 into the function and plugging in 6 into the function. So this is the range of f. This must be equal to the domain of g for the composite function to exist. ठीक है, ये rule है. इस तरह के इसके और भी questions हैं, ये भी देख लेते हैं. State the largest value of k possible for the composition of fg to be defined. So we're not finding out the range of the composite function. That's something else. We're finding out the we're finding out the rule for the composite function to be defined. So fg means that g is the inner function, f is the outer function. So the range of the inner function, which is simply equal to 2k minus 3, we will get by simply plugging in k into the function g. This must be equal to the domain of the outer function. Okay, so this is the range of the inner function. This is the domain of the outer function. So we equate them. We equate 2k minus 3 with lesser than or equal to k. And then we get k is lesser than or equal to minus half, which means k equals to minus half is the largest possible value of k for the composite function to exist. Again, more examples. Take more examples. Always the same way to solve them. Inverse, very important. How do you find out inverse? Same rules as O levels. Replace f of x with y, make x the subject, replace x with f inverse and y with x. Achha, but some important rules. Domain of f becomes range of f inverse. Range of f of x becomes domain of f inverse. Inverse of a function will only exist if it's a one-to-one function. The graph of f inverse of x is a reflection of the graph f of x along the line y equals to x. So that means if you're given the graph of f of x and you want to draw the graph of f inverse of x, you simply swap the values and that's how you get the graph of f inverse. Okay. Right now the inverse does not exist, but if you change the domain to greater than or equal to the x coordinate of the turning point or lesser than or equal to, the inverse will exist. And you can see this is the graph of f of x, this is the graph of f inverse of x. You can see that they're both a reflection of each other along the line y equals to x. Okay? Then in order to find out the domain, in order to find out the inverse of a quadratic function, you have to first bring it in completed square form. When you do that, at some point you have to take the square root on both sides. To get rid of the square, you get a plus minus. How will you decide whether we're going to go with plus or minus? Notice that if the domain of f of x is greater than or equal to 3, that means the range of the inverse function must also be greater than or equal to 3, and that will be achieved by keeping a plus sign. If the domain of the original function is lesser than or equal to 3, that means now the range will also be equal to lesser than or equal to 3, which will be obtained by using the negative sign. And then I've explained a plan B also, जो कि आप लोग जाके देख सकते हैं कि plan B, अगर आपको ये वाला method नहीं समझ आ रहा, then there's a plan B also. Okay. Then there is transformation. Transformation, like I said, I'm just going to go over it briefly. Okay? Because we've done lots of transformation recently only. So iska hum table dekh lete hain, that's good enough. So in translation, if you add something to the equation, the graph moves a unit up, and to describe it is vector 0a. And this is what happens to the point. Okay, dekho, whatever v is the vector, that is how you describe it, and that is what happens to the point. X में equation के साथ हमेशा उल्टा होता है. So if for example I subtract a from the entire equation, that means the change has happened in y. So y is straightforward. The column vector is 0 minus a. The graph moves a units down. And how do you make that happen? You subtract a from the y coordinate. But if it's f of x minus a, if you subtract a from the equation, the graph moves towards the right. Which means you can look at it the opposite way also. If you want to make the graph move a units towards the right, you subtract a from the equation. Okay? And if the graph is moving towards the right, that means the column vector is a0, and the new, what will happen to every point is that x plus a comma y. And then if you add a units to the equation, the graph will move a units to the left. This is how you describe it. And the point will have coordinates. Every point will have coordinates x minus a comma y. Some example questions, you can review it. अच्छा, अब देख लेते हैं reflection की summary. If you multiply the entire equation by minus, then the graph gets reflected along the x-axis slash y equals to 0. Okay, and the coordinates will be x comma minus y of each point. If you only change x to minus x, then the reflection that has occurred is along the y-axis, and every point becomes minus x comma y. अच्छा, stretch की summary देख लेते हैं. Stretch में ये बहुत important है कि x में उल्टा होता है. If it's getting multiplied by 3 in the equation, that means the stretch factor is 1 upon 3. And every point will also be multiplied by 1 upon 3, or you can say that it gets divided by 3. If in the equation you're multiplying it by half, that means the stretch factor will be 1 upon the coefficient of x, which is equal to 2, and every x coordinate will be doubled now. Okay? Vertical stretch is straightforward. Whatever you multiply the entire function with, that's your stretch factor or scale factor. Simple. Again, a summary. If it's in the x, we write it in the x direction, or we write parallel to x-axis. If you multiply something with x, the point gets divided by that value. Okay? Or you can just think of it as, and in order to find out the stretch factor, you always do 1 upon the coefficient of x. Meaning, if it's half x, to find out the stretch factor, we will do 1 upon half, that's equal to 2. And whatever is the stretch factor is what is done to the point. So if the stretch factor is 2, every point gets multiplied by 2. If the stretch factor is half, every point gets multiplied by half. ठीक हो गया? Y की चीज़ें straightforward हैं. If you're multiplying it by a, that means the stretch factor is also a, and there is a stretch in the y direction. ठीक है? अच्छा, then regarding multiple transformations, remember we apply BODMAS in both cases. If there are Both vertical transformations such as a stretch and a vertical translation, we always stretch it first, then we translate it. If there are multiple horizontal transformations, we first of all make the coefficient of x equal to 1, then we apply BODMAS. So we look at what it's being multiplied with. It's being multiplied by 2. That means there is a stretch parallel to x-axis with scale factor half. And then we translate y because we see x minus 2. So that means a translation has occurred with column vector 2, 0. But please, in questions like these, be open to the idea of trial and error. The transformations, the order that you think in which the transformation is being applied, you apply the transformation in that order and see whether you get the desired result or not. Okay? Don't ego solve. Don't think you don't need to do any trial and error and, you're going to get it right in the first attempt. I hope you do, but it's always a good idea to feel confident about your solution. So yeah. If you have one horizontal and one vertical, such as you have a horizontal stretch and a vertical translation, the order does not matter. Okay. If you have, let's say, a translation which involves both horizontal and vertical, and you have a vertical stretch, in that case, remember, whatever transformation that requires multiplication, we do that first. Okay. So for example, if you have a vertical stretch and you have a horizontal and vertical translation, you will do stretch first. Okay. Ek rule bana lo that whenever there is stretch parallel to y-axis, you always do that first. Okay. Make that rule and you'll never go wrong, inshallah. Then there are some past paper questions which we solved. We solved lots and lots of them. You guys can review them. We did some yesterday also. ठीक है, वो भी आप लोग देख सकते हैं. अच्छा, now let's talk about differentiation. This is the second last chapter. फिर मैं इस chapter के बाद I'll open the chat. And then we'll do integration. Okay, so what are the concepts in differentiation? अच्छा, एक concept coordinate geometry में which I think I missed. किसी ने point out भी किया था. हाँ, ये. Okay. Okay, here's a concept in coordinate geometry which I missed. The reason why मुझे differentiation देख के याद है is because इसका question जो है वो differentiation में आया था या integration में आया था, one of the two, I don't know. So it's this formula, and this formula is how to calculate the angle between two lines. So tan theta is equals to m1 minus m2 over 1 plus m1 m2. Now what is m1? m1 is the gradient of line 1. What is m2? Gradient of line 2. Okay, so you subtract the two gradients in the denominator, you do 1 plus the product of the two gradients, you take the tan inverse, and remember always to take tan inverse of the positive value, and this will give you the answer to the gradient between two lines. Okay, like I said, this question was tested in differentiation. I'll go over, and so let's go over it right now. Okay, since we've touched upon this, let's go over this right now. I hope I can find the question. This was differentiation, yeah, integration. Yeah. So the acute angle between two tangents is B, denoted by alpha, and the scales on the axes are the same. Okay, so you can see that you have to find out the angle between this tangent and this tangent. Okay? So what we've done is we have basically found the gradient of both the tangents. Now these are two different curves. एक ये curve जा रहा है और एक ये curve जा रहा है. Both of them have two different equations since they're two different curves, obviously. So we differentiate both the equations. We differentiate the equation of this curve. We plug in x equals to 4. We find out the gradient of one tangent, which is equal to half. Now it must be this one because it has gradient half. Then we differentiate this equation. We plug in x equals to 4. Since that's the point where the tangent is drawn, we find out the gradient of the other tangent, which is equal to 3. And then we straight away use this formula, and then we get the answer. Okay, m1 minus m2, that means we subtract their gradients, we do 1 plus the product of their gradients, we get tan alpha to be equal to minus 1, we take tan inverse of 1 and we get 45 degrees. Okay, इसी तरह से you can also use this formula to find out the gradient between a line and the horizontal axis. Okay, उसके लिए you can also use this formula. I don't know वो सवाल किस में आया था. But for that, you can use tan theta equals to m here. Yeah. So remember tan theta equals to m. So you were given actually that the point where the tangent cuts the x-axis, the angle is tan inverse of 2. The angle that it makes with the positive x-axis is tan inverse of 2, and you had to find out the gradient. So the rule is that tan theta is equals to m, and theta is basically tan inverse of the gradient. So tan theta becomes 2, and we can see that the gradient is basically equal to 2. ठीक है, ये भी एक formula है जो आप use कर सकते हैं. Anyway, now let's continue with differentiation. The general rule to differentiate power functions is that the power gets multiplied, you take one away from the power. If you differentiate a constant, you get 0. Okay, some more rules. Make sure to simplify. Make sure if you have a question like this, you separate the denominator and then you differentiate. If you have something like this, you expand and simplify and then you differentiate. If you have something like this, make sure to shift x in the numerator before you differentiate. There is no product rule and quotient rule in AS, but if you know how to use them, you can go ahead and use them also. Okay, composite functions means this is the general rule. The power gets multiplied. You take one away from the power, and then don't forget to multiply in the end by the differential of the expression inside the bracket. Okay? Okay, now, to find out gradient, you differentiate, and then you plug in the value of x at which you want the gradient. Okay? Now, how do you find out the equation of tangent slash normal? Step-by-step rule. First, you find dy by dx by differentiating the equation of the curve. Then you plug in x equals to x1 to find out the gradient of tangent. Once you have the gradient, you can check this box. And now what you want is you want the point on the line. So if you're already given the x coordinate, you can plug in the x coordinate into the equation of the curve to find out the y coordinate. Now you have all the ingredients to find out the equation. If you want the equation of normal, remember to take the negative reciprocal of the gradient of tangent, because normal means that it's a perpendicular line. ठीक हो गया? Some example questions for you guys to go through if you want. Some more example questions. Acha. Increasing slash decreasing functions. An increasing function is where dy by dx is greater than 0. A decreasing function is where dy by dx is less than 0. A stationary point, turning point, maximum point, minimum point is found by doing dy by dx equals to 0. जैसे ये curve है, it's decreasing for as long as x is less than h. Then it's increasing if x is greater than h. Why? Because dy by dx is greater than 0. And at the stationary point, it's stationary. At x equals to h, it's stationary because dy by dx is equal to 0. Okay, so to find out whether a function is increasing or decreasing, you differentiate. And then after you've differentiated, you analyze. You can see that this will always be negative. And this will always be negative also, which means a negative value plus a negative value will always be negative, therefore it's a decreasing function. अच्छा, ये reason कभी marking scheme में होता है, कभी नहीं होता. But make a habit of writing the reason before you draw your conclusion. ठीक है? अच्छा, once again, you're supposed to find out whether it's increasing or decreasing. So this is f prime of x. You can see that after we bring it in completed square form, we can see that there's always a plus 4, which means that no matter what value of x we plug in, the whole function is always going to be greater than or equal to 4. Therefore, the dy by dx will always be greater than or equal to 4, which means it's positive, always positive. Therefore, it's increasing. Okay? Achha, some more examples. Now, how to find out the stationary point and its nature? इसका पूरा एक rule बना हुआ है. To find out the stationary point, you find dy by dx or f prime of x, and then you equate it to 0. When you solve, you will either get 1 or more than 1 x coordinate. So once you have those x coordinates, they're representing the x coordinates of the turning points. You will plug in those x coordinates into the equation of the curve to find out the y coordinates. And then to find out the nature, you will double differentiate. Now, when you double differentiate, there are two possibilities. Ya to your answer is a constant, which means you will see its sign. If it's negative, it's maximum. If it's positive, it's minimum. Or your double differential, your double derivative is in terms of x, which means you will now plug in the x coordinates of the stationary point. Once again, you'll obtain a constant, and if it's negative, it's maximum. If it's positive, it's minimum. Okay, I've done some example questions for you guys to review. Okay. Then, acha, okay, now, there is rates of change देख लेते हैं. Rates of change. अच्छा, differentiation पे भी I've done a whole detailed stream. Make sure you guys check it out. Rates of change is done by using chain rule, and it helps in understanding how one quantity changes with respect to another at a given instant. ठीक है? So dy upon dx refers to rate of change of y with respect to x. Rate of change of radius means dr upon dt. Rate of change of volume means dv upon dt. If it's height, it's dh upon dt. If it's area, it's d upon dt. Acha, I'll straight away jump to a past paper question so that I can show you the rule that we follow. So for example, here you're given the volume of a spherical balloon is increasing at a rate of 50 centimeter cube per second. So remember the 3W rule that we follow to do any rates of change question. What is given? What rate of change is given? That's dv upon dt. What rate of change do you want? You want the rate of change of radius. That means dr upon dt. And when do you want the rate of change of radius? You want it when r is equals to 10. So 3Ws. What is given? What you want? When you want it. Now what you want is dr upon dt, so make a chain rule for it, which means the numerator of the first fraction will be dr, the denominator of the second fraction will be dt, and here you'll have something that's common and also relevant. So the only thing that makes sense is dv, so we'll have dv over here. ठीक हो गया? And this is what we end up with. And then there are more questions. No matter how many questions you solve, you will always notice the same pattern over and over again. These are some really old questions that I've solved. They're still relevant, okay, but it's just that you can review them for examples if you want. Okay, now let's have a look at integration. मैं ज़रा chat खोल देता हूँ. See what you guys are up to. No need to write down the formulas. Formulas are given, no need to write them down. And don't expect any marks by writing them down. Sir, so panicking, maths composite. Sir, how can you do 2 back-to-back syllabus run-throughs? Well, here I am about to end them. I don't know how I pulled them off, but I'm glad I did. Sir, rate वापस बताते हैं. बेटा अगर डिटेल में देखना है रेट तो डिफरेंशिएशन की स्ट्रीम देख लो. ठीक है? Why is there a walking stick? No, that's not a walking stick there. That is my kid's scooty. It's not a walking stick. It's a scooty. Yeah, I'll definitely miss you guys too. I'll miss these also. Sir, reciprocal function है syllabus में? Yeah, rational functions है, of course. ए आ जाएगा, मुझे क्या पता बेटा ए आएगा नहीं आएगा. अच्छा, क्विकली इंटीग्रेशन देख लेते हैं, फिर I'll tell you guys how to go about these last hours of your life before the exam. Not inshallah last hours of your life, may you guys all live long and healthy lives, but last hours before the exam. ठीक है, we'll talk about that. And एक सेकेंड. ओके, क्या चल रहा है यहाँ पे? Domain of the composite function is basically the domain of the inner function. Yep, that is correct. ठीक है, बट हम उसको रेंज के इक्वल करते हैं. ठीक है, हम उसको रेंज के इक्वल करते हैं. रेंज ऑफ द इनर फंक्शन इक्वल्स टू द डोमेन ऑफ द आउटर फंक्शन टू डिटर्मिन वेदर to find out the condition for composite function to exist. Redo is range inner, domain outer. Yep, that's correct. That is correct. Sir, I use columns, but I also use arrows. But avoid columns, okay? Avoid columns at all costs. That's what I'm going to say. Okay? Okay, now let's continue. Okay, integration आखिरी topic है. फिर हम inshallah I'll tell you guys what to do before the exam, and then that's gonna be it. ठीक हो गया? Okay, so integration is actually much easier than differentiation. Why? Because it does not involve a lot of concepts. You have integration applied to dy by dx to find out the equation of the curve. You have integration applied to a curve to find out area. And you have integration applied to a curve to find out volume. And then you have improper integral, which is a newly added concept in 2022. Ab dekho, here is the center of integration. That's the equation of the curve. You integrate the equation of the curve for two reasons: to find out the area under the curve and to find out the volume generated. That's it. What do you differentiate it for? You differentiate it for multiple reasons. You differentiate it to find out the gradient, to find out the equation of tangent, to find out the stationary value, and then you differentiate it again to find out the nature. What do you integrate dy by dx or f prime of x for? You integrate to find out the equation of the curve. ठीक है, तो ये flow chart याद रखो. ठीक है, this flow chart will tell you when you integrate and when you differentiate. And what is integration? It is the reverse process of differentiation. Now, what's the general rule? To integrate power functions, you add 1 to the power, you divide by the new power, and you always do a plus c. Why? We've talked about that multiple times. No need to go over it. Okay? Achha. Then you have, if you have something like this, make sure that you make it integration ready by first separating the denominator, and for as long as you don't integrate, you keep the integration sign as it is. Now this is integration ready, meaning I've written it in a way that every expression, every part of this expression can be treated as a power function, so we can start integrating it, which is by adding 1 to the power, dividing by the new power, so on and so forth. Okay, finding the equation of the curve. If you have dy by dx, you will integrate dy by dx to find y in terms of x. So here is y in terms of x, but wait a minute, we have a plus c. Every time you integrate, you will always have a plus c. Now, just like in the equation of a straight line, you find out the value of c by plugging in a point through which the line is passing. In curves also, you find out the value of c to find out you find out the value of c by plugging in a point through which the curve is passing. So we plug in a point through which the curve is passing and we find out the value of c, and now we can complete the equation of the curve. Again, same examples. Integration of composite functions. How do you integrate a function like this? You add 1 to the, ये तो differentiation है. You add 1 to the power, divide by the new power, and you also divide by the differential of the expression inside the bracket, which a lot of people, including me, sometimes forget. So make sure you don't do that, and don't forget to do a plus c towards the end. Okay? So if you want to integrate 2x plus 5, the whole thing square, add 1 to the power, divide by the new power, and also either think of it this way, that you're multiplying the denominator or you're further dividing this expression with the differential of the expression inside the bracket. Okay? अच्छा, ये rule apply होता है only when you have a linear function inside. If you don't have a linear function inside, for example, if you have x square plus 3, then it's always a good idea to expand it first and then integrate it, जैसे कुछ volume के questions में होता है. So if you want to integrate this, first of all, write it nicely. अच्छा, sometimes you will notice कि मैं कभी constant को बाहर ले जाता हूँ, फिर integrate करता हूँ. Sometimes I keep it as it is, so it's up to you. No hard and fast rule, but just make sure that you don't forget anything. And also remember that you can use your calculator to find out dy by dx at a specific point. So make sure you do that to check your answer. And you can also use your calculator to integrate within limits. Okay? And that's the concept that we're going to touch upon. Area under the curve. Area under the curve, how do we do that? We integrate the equation of the curve using the 2 points between which we want the area as the limits. Okay, so we plug in the upper limit, then we plug in the lower limit, we subtract the two answers. Acha, isme there's a lot of debate about what working do we have to show, what working we don't have to show. So my advice is, because this is all done using a calculator only, so you plug in the upper limit in your calculator, you write down the end result that you get after plugging in the lower limit, you plug in the lower limit, you write down the end result that you get after plugging in the lower limit. You don't necessarily have to show this step, ठीक है? And then you can write down this answer. देखो, कोई भी arithmetic step होता है बीच में, वो आप बेशक skip कर सकते हो. लेकिन कोई भी algebraic step, like for example, if you're thinking कि you can just write this and then write this and not the stuff in between, that is not acceptable. अच्छा, if part of the curve is such that its area, that the area that you want is below the x-axis. So when you use integration with the limits, you will get a minus answer. Now ये math का आपको बताने को तरीका है कि भाई जो आपने area निकाला है, that's actually below the x-axis. But since we want area, we will not give it with the minus sign. Okay, so you will get your answer as minus, but remember to take the absolute value of it, meaning take the positive value of it, since you're finding out area, and area, as we know, can never be negative. Once again, if you want to find out the area of this curve between 1 and 3, you'll integrate the equation of the curve within the limits 1 and 3. Achha, this is a concept which is not a deal breaker if you don't know it. If you know it, that's great. If you don't, there is still a workaround. If you want to find out the area that is in between the curve and the y-axis, so what you can do is you can make x the subject, okay? So you make x the subject from this equation. Here you are, we made x the subject. Now you can integrate with respect to y, okay? And you can use the y values as your limits because the area is between the curve and the y-axis and the limits are also y values. So instead of doing what we do with y, we integrate y with respect to x. Here we're going to integrate x with respect to y. Why? Because the limits that we're using are y values. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा, then area of the shaded region. Remember this, planning is very important. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. अब area of shaded region निकालने के लिए we will see what is above. Okay, above we have the curve, so we'll first find out the area under the curve within the limits 3 to 7. Then we will find out area under the line. Now you can do area under the line or you can do area of trapezium. You can see that in situations like these, I always prefer a 2D shape if that's being formed, whether it's a trapezium or a triangle. Okay? Now I know some of you will say, can we subtract the two equations first and then apply the limits? Yes, of course you can do that because whether you subtract in the beginning or towards the end, it's the same thing. Meaning you can subtract the equation of the straight line since the line is below. It's basically upper minus lower. So whatever is the equation of the upper curve, from that we subtract the equation of the lower curve or line, doesn't matter, and then you can apply the limits, you'll get the answer directly. ठीक है, बट मैं इसको हमेशा इस तरह से प्रेफर करता हूँ स्टेप बाय स्टेप. ठीक है, इसमें ये होता है कि यू गेट ऑल द मार्क्स इन बिटवीन. ठीक है, ओके. देन देयर इज वॉल्यूम. अच्छा, बल्कि वॉल्यूम से पहले इम्प्रॉपर इंटीग्रल, चलो इम्प्रॉपर इंटीग्रल नहीं, पहले वॉल्यूम देख लेते हैं. अब देखो वॉल्यूम में वंस अगेन देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ कंफ्यूजन के व्हेन डू वी यूज सिलेंडर, व्हेन डू वी यूज कोन. माय एडवाइस इज डोंट यूज सिलेंडर, डोंट यूज कोन बिकॉज देयर आर वेरी रेयर सिनेरियोज वेयर यू कैन यूज अ कोन एंड अ सिलेंडर. It's best that you learn the standard rule which can be applied to every question there is. ठीक है, so if it is rotated about the x-axis, then this is the shape that will be formed if you take this part of the curve and rotate it 360 degrees about the x-axis. ठीक है, so this is the step-by-step procedure. Make y the subject if it isn't already. Square the answer of step 1, meaning find out y square. Integrate y square with respect to x within the limits a and b. So you integrate y square within the limits a and b and you multiply it by pi, and that's it. You have the volume. No need to make it more complicated. What if it's can I do cylinder, can I do cone? No need to do that because there are very rare scenarios where you can use cylinder and cone. Okay? But if it is rotated about the x-axis, you make x the subject. Sorry, if it is rotated about the y-axis, you make x the subject, you square the answer of step 1, you integrate x square with respect to y within the limits c and d, and you multiply the answer by pi. So bas ye rule yaad rakho. This is to find out the volume that's generated when a curve is rotated about the y-axis. Y hoga to x ko square karenge, x-axis hoga to y ko square karenge. Acha, although there haven't been a situation where it's not 360 degrees rotated or fully rotated, it's always fully rotated. But if let's say it's 180 degrees rotated, don't forget to divide the answer by 2 because you're not going to get the full solid, you're only going to get the half a solid. And if it's rotated 90 degrees, don't forget to divide it by 4. Okay? Just remember 360 degrees hai, so you don't need to do anything, but if it's anything other than that, then you need to divide. Okay, now the question says the shaded region is bounded by the curve and the y-axis degrees about the y-axis. So that means we will integrate this curve within the limits 2 and 1. Now this limit was not given to us. We had to figure it out ourselves by simply plugging in 0 in place of x. You can see that I've done that. We get two values of y, but obviously the value that makes the most sense is the positive one. So if this curve is rotated 360 degrees about the y-axis, we'll get a weird looking shape like this. Iski volume hum kaise nikalenge? We will first make x the subject because it's being rotated about the y-axis. So here's x the subject, we square it. You can see that I've applied the identity to expand 8 upon y square minus 2, the whole thing square. Now you make it integration ready by shifting y power 4 in the numerator and y square in the numerator. Then you integrate following rules of integration. You apply the limits. You multiply the answer by pi. That's it. Job done. Here's a question where it's rotated about the x-axis. Y is already the subject. You square it. Okay, you integrate it. You apply the limits, and this is what you get. Now, these are things that you can use your calculator to check your answer. And I do encourage that you use your calculator to check your answer. If you know how to do that, that's great. If you don't, then simply learn it. Watching a video or two. Achha, here it's also straightforward. It's just the curve that is being rotated within the limits 2 and 1. I'm looking for a question, yeah, like this. Find the volume obtained when the shaded region is rotated. Up, see what is on top. On top you have a curve, and below it you have the line. So if you want to find out the volume that is obtained when the shaded region is rotated 360 degrees about the y-axis, you will have to first find out the volume that is obtained by the curve. Then from that, you will have to subtract the volume that is obtained by the straight line. Just like how you would find out the area of shaded region by first calculating the area under the curve, then the area under the line. Same goes for volume. You will first find out the volume obtained by the curve. Then from that, you will subtract the volume obtained by the line. ठीक है, यहाँ पे मैंने किया हुआ है. Volume generated by curve minus volume by the line. And we're rotating it about the y-axis, so that means you'll have to make x the subject. So take the square on both sides, x subject ban gaya, square it using the identity. First find out the volume that is generated by the curve by integrating it. You can see I've integrated it, apply the limits. This is what we get when you multiply it by pi. Volume generated by the line, y equals to x plus 1, make x the subject, x equals to y minus 1. X square equals to y minus 1, the whole thing squared. This can be integrated directly because inside the bracket you have a linear function. So y minus 1, the whole thing cubed, divided by 3 within the limits 1 and 0. And this is what you end up with. Okay, in the end, don't forget to subtract your answer. And this is it. That's your answer. Acha, indefinite integral. Indefinite integral is when one limit is infinity. Okay? Now, all you have to do is just follow the normal procedure, integrate the same way that you integrate, doesn't matter the kind of function there is, and then you apply the limits. When you apply the limit, you will notice that since one of the limits is infinity, as soon as you replace x with infinity, what will happen is the denominator will become so large that if you divide minus 2 by an extremely large value, what happens is as denominator approaches infinity, the entire fraction approaches 0. Why? Because think of it this way कि एक पिज्जा है and you distribute it amongst a million people. तो क्या होगा? हर किसी के हिस्से में कितना आएगा? हर कोई कहेगा कि भाई छोड़ो, because it's as good as 0. Everyone will probably get an atom share. Okay, so that is why whenever the denominator becomes infinity, the same concept we use in functions, the entire expression approaches 0. And then the only thing that's left for us to work out is what do we get after plugging in 1. So if you plug in 1, this is what you get. You get minus 2 upon 3, so 0 minus 2 upon 3. This is what you end up with. There's another example. That is this. Isko bhi you'll work it out the same way. You'll plug in one limit, which is infinity, one limit, which is 1. You'll subtract, and this is what you're going to end up with. Okay, ye wahi concept aa gaya. And I believe that's it. Yep, that is it. We have done not a thorough run through. It was not meant to be a thorough syllabus run through, but it was just meant to refresh all the concepts that you guys already know. I'll open the chat for a few minutes to hear what you guys have to say, and then just gonna give you guys some tips about what to do tomorrow. So how do you find area of triangle between normal and x-axis? You need to first find out the points, okay? And make a rough sketch. Making a rough sketch is very important. And then you need to make sure that you figure out the base and height, and then you find out the area. S1, M1 streams inshallah kal se. Okay? Sir, could you show your biceps? No, beta, I'm not showing my biceps. Sir, exam techniques, please. Abhi dene lagao. Don't worry. Circular measure में बहुत problem हो रही है. What do you think I should do about that? Vanya, start from the basics. Look at the formulas. See what are the important formulas. And always plan. If you want to find out the area of shaded region, plan. Okay? Whether it's perimeter of shaded region, plan. Look for basic trigonometry. Where can you apply basic trigonometry? ये सारी चीज़ें सब planning से होती हैं. If you get the plan right, you will always make sure that you will always get the correct answer, inshallah. So range of outer function is the range of composite function and domain of inner function. Beta, isko redo se yaad rakho. Range of the inner equals to domain of the outer. So in the volume shaded region, can't I just use the triangle? No, because the triangle is not of which you're supposed to calculate the volume. You're supposed to calculate the volume of the shaded region. So how can it be the triangle? Yes, it is. सलमान, अच्छा आप लोगों की आपस में ही बातें चल रही हैं. सो जस्ट इन केस प्लान ही गलत हो गया तो प्लान गलत हो गया तो ठीक है, सवाल भी गलत हो जाएगा, बट इन्वेस्ट अ गुड अमाउंट ऑफ टाइम फॉर प्लानिंग. ओके, इन्वेस्ट a good amount of time, make sure you get the plan right before you start. ठीक है. Order of transformation, I've talked about that. Sir, कौन सा pen use कर? But I don't know, I haven't, so you're probably asking the wrong person. I don't know what pen to use. Sir, do we have to, does the circle lie in the circle from advance? No, you don't need that. So can we just use x के points for always area and volume? बेटा ये इतना आसान सवाल नहीं है जवाब देने का कि हम सिर्फ x के पॉइंट्स यूज़ करें. आई डोंट नो इन व्हाट कॉन्टेक्स्ट यू आर आस्किंग, बट if you don't know the concept, you can watch the stream. Right now I can't just, first of all, I don't understand your question, so I don't want to end up misguiding you. Okay, all right, so guys, let's just give me 1 minute. Let's talk about what to do in the next couple of hours, how to start the paper. Let's discuss a couple of strategies and then we will wrap it up for good. Okay, so just give me 1 minute. Okay guys, just some final tips before I leave you. And so first of all, let me just open my notes. Yeah, so do a quick stationery check. Make sure that you guys have everything in order. You have a fully functioning calculator. A good idea would be to take 2 calculators, okay? Just in case one stops working. So make sure that you have 2 fully functioning calculators. Now is not a good time to experiment with a new calculator. If you're thinking, maybe I should get a calculator which has more features, now is not a good time to experiment with that. Make sure that you're using the calculator that you're used to. All right, and when you're starting the paper, first of all, I know that there's going to be a lot of anxiety. You're going to be under a lot of stress right now. I do understand that, and it makes sense. You're under a lot of stress, you're panicking because the stakes are high and you've put in a lot of effort and you want to make sure that you can get some good result out of those efforts. Okay, you want to make sure that those efforts don't go to waste. There's a lot invested by you, by your parents, by your teachers, by all the help that you've had. There have been a lot of people who have been a part of this journey with you. Okay, your parents, your teachers, your siblings, all the domestic help that you have, everyone. Okay, so make sure that you keep those in mind, and you kind of owe it to them also. You owe it to yourself, you owe it to them. So just make sure that you take the advice that I'm about to give you seriously, and you get a good night's sleep. Very important that you get a good night's sleep. Why? Because you want a fully functioning brain. Don't overwork yourself. You're only at this point. There are more chances that you'll basically end up doing more harm than good if you don't get a good night's sleep. Don't think, I know at this point, a good idea would be to just disconnect yourself from social media. Why? Because at this point, I know groups mein ho sakta hai that you come across some difficult questions, some students saying, solve this difficult question. This is something that's expected in the exam. Don't do that. Okay? Or someone claiming to have the leaked paper. Please, I can see that a lot of you are discussing leaks. stay away from that. At this point, you should not be counting on leaks. You should be counting on your own preparation. Okay? We did not put in so much effort. We did not do so many live streams just so that in the end, you guys can just have a look at the leaked paper. And then I'm not claiming by any means that the paper has been leaked or anything of that sort. But sadly, this is something that has been happening for a while now. So just refrain from that. Focus on your own preparation. Focus on the variables that you can control, not on the variables that you can't control. Acha. When you're starting the paper, before you start, remember to just give yourself some nice pep talk. Just remember that I've made you guys solve a lot of difficult mocks. I've made you guys solve a lot of difficult past paper questions. So inshallah, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever questions that you come across tomorrow, you guys must have solved questions even more difficult than those. You guys must have solved past papers more difficult than tomorrow's paper, inshallah. So just remind yourself that, whatever questions there are, I will be able to do it. I will be able to solve each and every single question. Why? Because I've practiced a lot. I've solved a lot of difficult questions. So inshallah, it's not going to be a problem for me. Acha. Then start with the easy stuff. So you will notice that a question on quadratics is usually very easy. The question on binomial is also very easy. Sometimes the question on APGP is also very easy. So start with the easy stuff. Sometimes even the question on differentiation integration is easy. Yes, they may be lengthy, but overall, the difficulty level, the difficulty level is not that high. They're mostly on the easier side. So start with those easy questions. Be mentally prepared for maybe 1 or 2 difficult questions. Okay? Don't be delusional. Yes, do give yourself a pep talk. You might say that I'm just contradicting myself, but realistically speaking, obviously there is a chance that you may come across a question that you can't solve, 1 or 2 questions, God forbid. So just be mentally prepared. If you're mentally prepared for something, then the shock is minimized. So be mentally prepared for those questions, but those 1 or 2 questions, those 20% of the marks should not ruin the remaining 80%. Okay, if you struggle in those difficult questions, leave them for later. Do the easy questions first. In fact, when you start the paper, make sure that you identify the easy questions first. You invest some amount of time reading the question to identify the easy ones, and you solve those questions first. Okay? Achha. Use your calculator to whatever it is that you can check your answer for. Like, for example, you can use your calculator to check answer for simultaneous equations, quadratic inequalities, gradient at a certain point, integration within limits for area under the curve, and also trigonometric graphs. You can use the table feature, which I've talked about. If you don't know how that works, then there are plenty of videos available online that you can watch. Then make sure that you show your working. Okay, whatever it is that you're using your calculator for, you have to show your working. Whether it's the quadratic formula, area under the curve, quadratic inequality, very important that you show your working. The calculator that we're using is only to check the answer. If you just write down the final answer and you write down the quadratic formula, do not expect any marks, and then don't cry about it, because I've mentioned this multiple times. Every time I've mentioned the use of calculator, I've always mentioned that you must use it only to check your answer. Okay, for questions such as functions, domain and range, please do not look for shortcuts, especially if there's a question where you have to find out the range of a function. Get friendly with it. Plug in some values, identify a trend. Remember, there is no formula, no trick. Most of the cases, just simple common sense and some trial and error. So please don't be lazy and give up easily. For questions such as equation of circle, area that you get after tangent cuts the x-axis, normal cuts the xy axis. We've done some questions. Make a rough sketch. A rough sketch is very important for questions such as the one I mentioned, equation of circles, for quadratic inequalities. Don't take my word for it. This is something that's mentioned in the examiner report multiple times, that if you make a rough sketch, you have a better perspective and you're able to understand the question better. Therefore, you're able to solve it correctly also. Okay? Achha. Make sure that you are in the correct mode of your calculator. Make sure that you reset your calculator before you start. Very important. Okay, just make a habit that as soon as you pick up your calculator, you reset it. Okay? If the question is about transformation and you're supposed to identify it, remember the rules that we've talked about. Make sure that you check as you go along. You will not have enough time towards the end. And even if you do have enough time towards the end, if let's say you've made an error right in the middle of the question, it will take you a lot of time to get yourself, to refamiliarize yourself with the question. It'll be as good as if you're starting, as if you're solving the question from scratch. So don't do that. Check your paper as you go along. Remember the 3-to-1 rule, 3 lines of working. Pause for 2 seconds, review it once. Okay? Achha, don't worry about the threshold. This is not in your control, doesn't matter. My DM is flooded right now. Okay, what's the threshold going to be? Is so and so expected? I don't know what's expected. I don't know what the threshold is going to be. But what I do know is what you can do in the last few hours to make sure that you do well in the paper. Okay? That's exactly what I'm telling you. So focus on the variables you can control, not on the variables that you cannot. Achha, stay hydrated. It's very hot, so make sure that you're drinking enough water. Don't eat too heavy. Don't eat anything out of routine. Don't do anything that's out of routine. Don't surprise your body at this time कि मैं एक healthy breakfast कर लेता हूँ because it's good, because it's healthy, or maybe I have a healthy meal because it's good. Just do whatever it is that's part of your routine. You know, you can work on that later. So if you guys have your AM paper, make sure that you say your prayers on time. If you have your paper in PM, make sure that you pray Zohar before the exam. ठीक है? And at this point, what should you do starting now? Disconnect yourself from social media. Just relax. Review your notes if you have to. Do not put yourself in a testing position. Do not solve a mock. Do not think कि मैं जो है वो बस एक question और कर लेता हूँ या एक question और कर लेती हूँ या maybe I should just look at one more past paper. Don't do that. Remember, spectator mode should be on right now. Spectator mode means that you're just watching everything from the sidelines. You're not picking up the pen. You're not picking up the calculator to solve anything. You're just reviewing everything that you have done so far, okay? Whether that's past papers, whether you're reviewing your errors, whether you're going through your notes, just don't solve anything. Just review. Just be in spectator mode till the time of the exam. And stay away from extremely negative people and stay away from extremely positive people. ठीक है? Extremely negative people कौन होते हैं? People who will just demotivate you for no reason and make you think that it's no big deal and you should not be under any stress. You know, you'll probably start doubting yourself. And extremely positive people are kind of people who will, you know, just make you, again, the idea is that both kind of people who are extremely positive, extremely negative will just make you feel bad about yourself, about your preparation, put you in a lot of self-doubt. So just stay away from such people. And you only have to do that for a couple of hours after you're done with the exam. Do let me know how it goes. And I will, inshallah, be waiting to hear from you guys. And once you guys are done with P1, inshallah, we'll lock in. You guys like the word lock in, right? So we'll lock in for M1 and S1. Okay? So that's it from my side. I'll enable the chat so that, you know, we can say our goodbyes. And I'll see you guys, inshallah, in the next stream. So take care, everyone. Allah Hafiz. Again, how many marks should we be getting? Beta, ye sab main nahi bata sakta aapko. I don't know what the threshold is going to be. Nobody knows what the threshold is going to be. So it's like you going to the doctor and just sitting there randomly and saying कि डॉक्टर कोई दवा बता दें. ठीक है? वो बोलेगा भाई बताओ तो मुझे आपको प्रॉब्लम क्या है. सर में दर्द है, टांग में दर्द है, so I can prescribe you a medicine accordingly. Okay, so just like that, I can't tell you how many marks you need to score, but if you want to set an absolute rule for yourself, aim for 65 plus. 65 plus, irrespective what the threshold is, you will always get an A. Simple as that. ठीक है? 65 plus अगर आप aim करोगे तो कुछ भी हो जाए threshold, you'll always end up with a good grade. But then again, if let's say the paper is extremely difficult and you're unable to score that, you might end up getting demotivated thinking that you're not going to end up with an A. But if the paper, like I said, is extremely difficult, then chances are that you will get an A on a lower score also. ठीक हो गया? I will pray for you guys. You guys need to pray for yourself also, and for all your teachers, parents, classmates, friends. 65. I said 65. 65 out of 75. Do we write an answer in 3 significant figures? Yes. Final answer, before you give the final answer, write multiple significant figures. In the end, write 3 significant figures. ठीक है? And then, all angles correct to 1 decimal place. Thank you. How do... अच्छा देखो, stress, you will feel stressed. Okay? If someone tells you at this point that they're not feeling stressed, they're probably lying or they probably don't care. Okay? So it's okay to feel stressed, but just make sure you don't physically exert yourself too much at this point. You don't mentally exert yourself. If you can't relax physically, then at least relax mentally by completely disconnecting yourself. Okay, completely letting go of social media, of your phone and everything, and just lie down. That's it. Okay? Breakfast क्या करूँ? Just do whatever it is that's part of your routine. ठीक है? अच्छा, I can see Sir Zain live आ गए. I think he probably also wants to have a word with you guys. So I'll leave now. ठीक है? Once again, good luck. Let me know आप लोगों का पेपर कैसा गया. I'll be waiting to hear from you guys. So take care, fellas. And inshallah, from tomorrow, I will start streaming M1 and S1. Okay? So take care, fellas. Once again, Allah Hafiz.